They said that Valyria was forever gone, that its secrets were consigned to ash and ruin. Yet stories persisted in the darkest corners of taverns and on the lips of bards who never dared to sing them aloud. Rumors of hidden bloodlines and clandestine orders, whispers that the Faceless Men were not merely an assortment of priests of the many-faced god, but something far older, far more personal, something that pulsed with the molten blood of the Valyrian freehold. In the latter years of Targaryen rule, when knowledge was a currency as precious as gold, there were those who believed the Faceless Men to be the last living descendants of a forgotten Targaryen branch, long exiled and raised in the shadows of Braavos. They had fled the doom by the narrowest margin, they said, and cloaked themselves in anonymity to hide from the world that would hunt them. That was the rumor. Very few believed it or even had the courage to speak of it. But Nyrema did. A girl of 15 and 5, Nyrema had been raised in Old Town among septas and novices of the faith. She was no stark acolyte but a ward, a child of uncertain parentage who had been left at the citadel's gates with nothing but a silver ring that bore a crest no one could decipher. They had tested it for illusions or illusions cast by trickster mages from Essos, but in the end, it seemed ordinary silver except for a faint imprint, a dragon's head, smudged and half-erased. Perhaps an old trinket from a traveling merchant, the maesters had told her when she turned 10. But Nyrema, who often dreamed of flame and shadow, felt the ring hum with significance. She devoured every scrap of knowledge she could in the citadel's archives. While the novices and acolytes studied for their chains, she studied for revelation. She pored over ancient Valyrian texts, searching for the repeated symbol of that dragon's head, so faint on her ring but still there if she caught the light just right. She learned enough High Valyrian to decipher the names of old houses, Celtigar, Valerion, Targaryen, and discovered references to lesser branches that had vanished in the years after the doom. Yet every mention she found led nowhere. Each clue dissolved into rumor, or half a name, or contradictory accounts that ended with the catastrophic fires that swallowed Valyria whole. But in the margins of one parchment she had found the phrase, the many-faced exiles. There was no explanation, no context, just those 4 words and a single scrawl of an odd mask. She made note of it, waited, watched, read. And she discovered, piece by piece, that the many-faced exiles sometimes appeared in texts that also mentioned the Targaryen sigil in a fleeting, elliptical way. That was the start of the dream, or perhaps the start of a destiny she never asked for. One autumn morning she abandoned Old Town. She left a short letter to the septa who had shown her kindness and set off. She had saved a few coins, enough to pay for travel on a merchant cog heading to Braavos. The ring was tucked around her neck on a thin chain, hidden beneath her dress. She did not know exactly what she sought, only that the city across the narrow sea was rumored to host the House of Black and White, the seat of the Faceless Men. And she had found that curious phrase about many-faced exiles, repeated just enough times in the margins of a few manuscripts to ignite her curiosity like wildfire. Braavos, the sprawling city of canals and shadows, beckoned. Her journey was not easy. The seas were unforgiving in that season, and a fierce storm battered the ship for days. Nyrema clung to her hammock in the ship's hold, listening to the relentless crashing of waves. She found herself reciting lines of High Valyrian prayers that she had discovered in a dusty tome. Prayers for safe passage, prayers once whispered by the old families of the freehold. When the storm subsided, she emerged pale and exhausted, yet more determined than ever. Braavos was everything she had heard and more. A labyrinth of canals and bridges, a city that pulsed with trade and secrecy alike. Narrow streets twisted like the coils of a sea serpent, and mists rolled in each evening, turning lamplight into eerie halos. Nyrema rented a small room near the Purple Harbor, using most of her remaining coin. She had no plans save for the name, the House of Black and White. She ventured into the city, asking cautious questions at first, yet found that most people's eyes hardened or shifted away when she mentioned the Faceless Men. They either knew nothing and wanted to remain ignorant, or they knew something and refused to speak. But she was not deterred. Eventually, a bridge seller, a wizened man who made a living by collecting tolls on a footbridge he'd built himself, told her in a hushed voice that the House of Black and White stood on a small isle beyond the edges of the main harbor, accessible by a slender walkway that many travelers missed. He also warned her, once you stepped inside that temple you might never come out the same. Nyrema thanked him and prepared herself, heart pounding with anticipation and fear. When she arrived at the House of Black and White, She first beheld an unassuming edifice with doors carved in two colors, one black, one white. Silence loomed like a sentient presence. She pushed open the white door. Inside, the air felt cool, and the gloom was softened only by flickering torches along the walls. A figure emerged, cloaked in gray, face shrouded. The figure asked her name and her reason for coming. She remembered reading that the faceless men often demanded truth, that their home was no place for liars. So she told the truth, or at least the part of it she knew. She had come seeking knowledge of an old rumor, that the faceless men were not who everyone believed them to be, that they might have once belonged to a storied lineage from Valyria. She could offer nothing but her own devotion to the search. In the silence that followed, her heart thumped loudly in her ears. The robed figure neither confirmed nor denied her words. Instead, they simply said, "Drink from the pool if you must, or depart this place." The water in the center of the temple was known to be deadly if you drank too much. Some came there to meet the many-faced god and lay down their lives. Fear fluttered in her stomach. She asked to be shown more. Another robed figure emerged, and then another. Their voices were calm but firm as they asked her question after question. "Why do you seek the secrets of Valyria? Why does it matter to you who the faceless men once were? And who are you truly?" At first, she answered them readily, explaining her search, her ring, her studies in Old Town. But when they pressed further why she believed the ring was Targaryen, why she believed the line might be unbroken, she found she could only repeat the half-baked theories she had gleaned from the margins of manuscripts. The faceless men said nothing but bid her to stay if she wished, for as long as she had the will. They gave her a cot in a dark corridor, told her she must ask no further questions outside the temple, and left her alone in the hush of candlelit halls. The days became weeks. Nyrema found the temple a silent realm of hushes and careful steps. She watched as men and women in robes moved like ghosts, sometimes wearing one face, sometimes another. She glimpsed them removing masks that clung to their skin as if grown there. She saw the faithful come to pray, to beg for the mercy of death, or to offer gold for a killing to be done. Little by little, she felt the quiet assimilation of that place seep into her. It did not repel her. It fascinated her. She discovered that at the back of the temple, beyond a corridor lined with statues of every known god of death, there was a small library of sorts, tomes about the many-faced god, about illusions and the forging of masks, about poisons and potions from across the known world. And among them, half-hidden, she discovered a locked chest of old parchments. It took her days to figure out how to open it without drawing attention. She watched from her cot as a kindly acolyte, a woman called Sira, if that was her true name, unlocked the chest one night to fetch a scroll. Nyrema noted the key she used, how she hid it beneath the statue's base. When at last she found a moment alone, Nyrema took the key and unlocked the chest. The parchment she found was delicate. It was a genealogical chart written in old Valyrian script. She recognized some of the house names, Orion, Draxus, Belarus, and down near the bottom, in faint ink, a sigil reminiscent of a dragon with 3 heads. But above that symbol, as if overshadowing it, were the words Darilaro Belmon, which she translated to the prince's mask. The lines connected to names that had been struck through with dark ink or simply faded with age, as though someone had tried to obscure them. She was trembling with excitement. She read further and found references to an exodus shortly before the Doom, led by an unnamed branch of a Valyrian dragon lord family that had ties to the Targaryens but was not the main line. There were scribbles about forging new identities in Bravos, a pact with the city's secret protectors. It was also fragmentary, yet it seemed to confirm the rumor that some Targaryens, or at least their kin, had survived, living under different faces, hiding themselves to avoid detection by enemies and perhaps even by their own main house line. She carefully put the parchment back and closed the chest, returning the key to where she found it. She did not attempt to speak of this discovery to anyone yet. She feared that if she was caught snooping, the consequences would be dire. Instead, she resolved to be patient, to watch and wait. Even as she pretended to sweep corridors and offer prayers by the pool, her mind raced with questions. If this was true, then the faceless men were not merely an assassin's guild that worshipped death as a god with 1,000 faces. They were the keepers of a legacy older than the 7 kingdoms, older than the Citadel's most hallowed texts. They were Targaryens, and perhaps that meant that somewhere within that ancient bloodline was her own heritage. She felt the weight of the silver ring around her neck. Could she be part of that broken branch, a descendant of an exile who had left a child at the Citadel's doorstep? A shift occurred one night when Sira found her gazing too long at a statue of the Valyrian goddess of death. Sira took her by the elbow, led her into a side chamber, and closed the door. In the dim candlelight, Nyrema could see the sharp intelligence in Sira's eyes. "You are not here to serve the many-faced gods," Sira said quietly. "You are here searching for secrets. The House of Black and White does not take kindly to intruders. But we also do not turn away knowledge-seekers if they prove their worth." Nyrema braced herself, expecting to be cast out. Instead, Sira continued, "You found the genealogical parchment, didn't you?" Nyrema tried to lie, but her gaze faltered. Sira sighed. "They have known from the moment you walked through that door that you sought more than solace or a contract. The question now is whether you will serve as a threat to our order or whether your quest can be guided." Nyrema swallowed hard. She confessed that she believed she might be descended from that same forgotten line, that she carried only a ring that bore a faint Targaryen symbol. Sira's expression did not soften. "Our order has existed far longer than you imagine," she said. "If we once carried that blood, it was bled out over centuries of change, of adopting new faces. Names and lineages do not matter to the faceless men as they do to lords and ladies in Westeros. Death has no name, no face, no house. That is our creed." Yet Sira did not turn her away. She led Nyrema deeper into the temple, to corridors she had never seen. There, in a private chamber adorned with an ancient mosaic of a dragon's silhouette, was an old man with a heavily scarred face. He spoke in a guttural, archaic form of Valyrian that Nyrema struggled to understand. Sira translated. "He says that among the first of our order there were those who fled the doom with a singular mission to destroy the abomination that Valyria had become. They believed the freehold had grown monstrous, forging weapons of flesh and fire. When the Targaryens left for Dragonstone, others left in secret for Braavos, forging this temple and forging new identities. They pledged themselves to the many-faced god to atone for the sins of dragon lords who enslaved thousands." Nyrema's heart pounded with each word. "So the rumor is true?" she breathed, tears threatening to fill her eyes. Sira merely said, "It is and it isn't. Bloodlines are not so simple. Does it matter if a handful of Targaryens survived here in Braavos, or if they were close kin, or if the blood was mixed with other families? The truth is that some seeds took root in the city's underbelly, and over time they realized that the only way to survive and to bring mercy to the suffering was to abandon their old identity. The House of Black and White was born out of that sacrifice." At that moment, Nyrema understood that the story was more complicated than a triumphant revelation of hidden Targaryen might. The Faceless men had renounced everything that made them who they once were. That they might have carried a lineage from the Valyrian freehold, perhaps even from the Targaryens themselves, was secondary to their vow to serve death as a liberator and an equalizer. But she could not so easily let it go. She wanted to know who she was. She wanted to know if her ring connected her to that heritage. She wanted to believe her life had meaning beyond the anonymity of a temple. Night after night she asked Sira and others for scraps of knowledge. Often they refused to speak. "We are no longer who we were," they would say, or "What is the difference between a dragon lord and a beggar in the eyes of death?" But occasionally they would let slip bits of history, references to a secret exodus from Dragonstone, a hidden vault in Braavos where old Valyrian artifacts were kept, the existence of a giant ledger that recorded all the births among the exiles. Nyrema's curiosity consumed her. She could think of nothing but the possibility that somewhere in the labyrinth of the city was a record that might confirm her lineage. Late one evening, as she dozed in her cot, she felt a knife at her throat. She jolted awake, heart hammering. Standing over her was a faceless man wearing the semblance of an androgynous youth, eyes dark as midnight. No words were spoken, but she sensed a cold warning. Prying too far could be lethal. Then, just as swiftly as the blade appeared, it withdrew and she was left trembling in the dark, tears streaming down her cheeks from the terror of it. She understood that the House of Black and White was not a place for idle curiosity. The knowledge she sought could be her undoing. But she did not leave. Something in her refused to run even when confronted with mortal danger. Perhaps it was the dragon's stubbornness in her blood, if indeed she had any. Perhaps it was the call of something that had lain dormant, waiting for a generation to be awakened. In her lonely cot, she dreamt of dragons coiled beneath the sea, waiting to rise. She dreamt of masked figures dancing in the ash-laden skies of old Valyria. She heard voices whispering in a language she half understood, blood of the dragon, hidden and concealed. The flame that does not die. Finally, the tension broke in an unexpected way. A contract came to the House of Black and White. Someone in Westeros, a lesser lord from the Reach, had offered gold to see the young bastard daughter of a Targaryen ally eliminated. Sira mentioned it in passing, her face betraying no emotion. Nyrema, overhearing, felt dread coil in her belly. She did not know the details, but she knew that if the Order accepted the contract, the girl's fate was sealed. She dared to ask Sira, why kill her? What has she done? Sira answered, it does not matter. The many-faced God takes who he will, and we are but his instruments. Nyrema felt her heart pound with anger. She had always admired the notion of justice, of mercy, but the cold neutrality of the faceless men was something she could not stomach. She knew then that she was different from them. She might seek their secrets, but she could never become one of them. She cared too much for the living, for the possibility of a future shaped by knowledge rather than death. That night, Nyrema resolved to leave the temple. Not to abandon Bravos, but to slip away and continue her search without the constant threat of a knife at her throat. Yet she also realized that before she fled, she must see if the genealogical records hinted at anything else, a ledger, a name, a clue. She waited until the small hours when the temple's corridors were mostly empty. She stole down to the library, moving quietly in the darkness. Using the key she had discovered earlier, she opened the chest again, heart pounding. This time, she pulled out several scrolls and pored over them in the flickering light of a single candle. The Valyrian script was old, half-faded, but she made out references to those who would not kneel, to exiles who had forsaken their house name. One phrase caught her eye, the silver ring is the first key to the final face. Her breath caught. The silver ring. She wore one, though it seemed impossible that this was the same ring until she read further, entrusted to the novices of knowledge, that the line may one day find redemption. A swirl of confusion and hope battered her mind. Could it be that her ring was that ring? She had no time to speculate further. Footsteps. She quickly returned the scrolls to the chest, locked it, and hid behind a pillar as a robed figure entered the library. She caught a glimpse of the face, the old man, scarred and silent. He paused by the chest as if sensing something was amiss, then slowly drifted away. Once the corridor was clear, Nyrema fled. She crept back to her cot, barely able to steady her breathing. She felt certain that by morning, the House of Black and White would know someone had been rummaging again. She had to escape before they silenced her for good. At the first break of dawn, she slipped through the black door at the side of the temple, trusting that the thick fog blanketing Bravos would hide her. She hurried across a narrow footbridge, ignoring the swirl of suspicious glances from the city's early risers. She made her way to the Purple Harbor, to the humble room she had rented. She gathered what few belongings she had left, paid her landlord a last coin, and vanished into the warren of backstreets. She moved from inn to inn, never staying more than a night, sleeping with a dagger under her pillow. She was certain the faceless men were looking for her. But no one struck yet. Perhaps they were waiting for her to lower her guard. She dreaded each footstep behind her, each accidental brush of a stranger's cloak. Yet for all her caution, she did not abandon her quest. She sought out any who might know of secret Valyrian enclaves and Bravos. She spoke with old sailors, rummaged through neglected records in the Sea Lord's archives, and found tantalizing hints of an old building near the Drowned Gardens rumored to house a vault of Valyrian relics. Every question, every bribe, drew her closer. She had to be swift, though. She knew that the faceless men could find her at any moment. Weeks passed in tense unease. Finally, she located the building, a boarded-up structure overshadowed by tall, leaning apartments. Vines crept across its walls, and its doors seemed sealed with rusted iron. At night, she pried away some boards and slipped inside. The interior smelled of must and rot. Dust clouded her every breath. But with her flickering lantern, she found a staircase leading down to what looked like a hidden cellar. There, in the gloom, she discovered rows of old crates and chests. Many were empty or filled with worthless debris. But in the far corner, beneath a collapsed rafter, she saw a single chest bound with bronze bands etched in Valyrian glyphs. She whispered a small prayer to the Seven, an old habit from her days in Old Town, and tried to pry the chest open. It was locked, but a quick hammer of a loose brick broke the corroded lock. Inside, she found parchments wrapped in oilcloth. Her lantern's light revealed they were written in the same archaic style as the temple's genealogical records. As she unrolled them, her hand began to shake. Lists of births, marriages, and deaths all dated centuries ago. And at the bottom of the last page, she recognized the sigil of the three-headed dragon, Targaryen. But over it was drawn a mask with no features, as if the face had been wiped clean. She read on, discovering references to children who had taken the vow of the many-faced god. Others who had renounced their claims to the dragon. But then, near the end, she found an unstruck name, Remian. Next to it was a note in Valyrian that roughly translated to, "He fled to the west, entrusted the ring to the guardians of knowledge for the day the line might be redeemed." Nyrema pressed a hand to her mouth. It had to be the ring she wore, or one like it. She blinked away tears of awe. If Remian was a scion of the exiles, then perhaps she was his descendant. A sound behind her nearly made her drop the parchment. Standing at the foot of the stairs was a figure in a dark cloak, face concealed by a smooth mask of pale wood. A faceless man. Nyrema felt terror coil in her gut. She clasped the parchments tight against her chest, her lantern trembling in her hand. The figure stepped forward with uncanny silence. In a voice that seemed to echo, it said, "Child, you have stumbled into secrets that were not meant for prying eyes. The House of Black and White does not forgive easily." Nyrema tried to speak but found her throat dry. The figure continued, "Our vow is to the many-faced God. We shed our old identities to serve death in all its mercy. That is the truth you found, and yet you continue to rummage like a starving rat. Why do you persist?" She swallowed. Her voice shook as she said, "Because I want to know who I am. I want to know if the blood in my veins has meaning, if I am part of something that was lost." The masked figure cocked its head as though considering her. Then, in a fluid movement, it plucked a dagger from its belt. Nyrema clenched her teeth, expecting it to be the last moment of her life. She could feel the ring grow hot against her skin, or maybe that was just her fear. Time slowed, but the faceless man did not strike. Instead, it removed its mask. Beneath was a young woman's face, unremarkable but for her intense gray eyes. Nyrema recognized her. It was Sira. "You are determined," Sira said softly. "And for that I could kill you here and now. But perhaps it would be better if you understood your place. You are not the first to come seeking these secrets. You will not be the last. We allow the knowledge to seep into the world as it wills, for death eventually claims all secrets. Yet you must realize that we are not Targaryens. We are not even the shards of that house. Those who once held that name gave it up. If you hold their blood, then you must decide what to do with it." Nyrema felt tears welling up. If they gave up everything, she asked, then why preserve these records? She clutched the parchments. Why does the ring matter? Sira's expression remained impassive. "Some among us believed that one day a child of the exiled line might seek answers, might seek to atone for the horrors of Valyria. They believed that all knowledge, even the knowledge of one's lineage, should not be extinguished. But others among us believe that the best way to atone is to destroy all traces of the old ways. That is the argument at the heart of our order." A hush fell. Dust swirled in the lantern light. Sira slowly approached, put a hand on Nyrema's trembling shoulder. "You must leave Braavos, child," she said. "The debate within our order grows heated. Some want your blood spilled to ensure the secrets you've uncovered never spread. Others argue you should be left to your path. You will not be safe here. Take what you have learned and go." Nyrema did not know whether to trust her, but she had little choice. She stared at Sira's unwavering eyes. "Go where?" she asked, voice nearly breaking. Sira's lips pressed together. "Westeros, perhaps? You carry Targaryen blood, if that is what you believe, and the Targaryens still rule in King's Landing. Or they did until recently. Their line is fracturing, but perhaps you can find some shred of your heritage there. Or find a quiet corner of the world and hide. But if you remain here, they will find you." A swirl of emotions tore through Nyrema. She was on the cusp of the answers she had spent her life craving. Part of her wanted to defy the faceless men, to claim these parchments and ring them like a bell to the entire city, to proclaim that hidden branches of the Targaryens had survived the doom and now lurked in the shadows. But the sense of self-preservation was strong. Sira gave her a small pouch of coins. "Use these. That is all I can offer. And do not show yourself to us again." Sira turned to leave, but Nyrema found the courage to ask one last question. "Why help me?" Sira paused, not turning around. "Because I, too, was once curious about the face behind the mask. That curiosity nearly killed me. Now, I see a chance for you to shape your own fate. Perhaps that is worth something in the eyes of the many-faced God." And then she vanished into the darkness, leaving Nyrema alone. The next morning, Nyrema secured passage on a Braavosi galley heading toward Pentos. She traveled under a false name, wearing a hooded cloak at all times. She could feel the presence of unseen watchers, but no one moved against her. She wondered if Sira was interfering to keep her safe, or if the order simply preferred she flee. On the deck of the galley, she often gazed at the receding silhouette of Braavos, her mind awash with revelations. The faceless men might have once been a branch of the Targaryens, or perhaps close kin. They had renounced that identity so thoroughly that they had become something else entirely. Yet remnants of that old fire still existed, hidden in dusty vaults and in genealogical charts left to molder. And within her, perhaps, that fire burned as well. When she reached Pentos, she found the city less hostile than she expected. She made inquiries about ships heading toward Westeros. She heard rumors of turmoil in the Seven Kingdoms, of various lords vying for influence. She heard that the Targaryen line was under threat from within and without. There were pretenders, there were Blackfire rumors, there were lords who whispered that the dragons had grown weak. Nyrema wondered if revealing herself would do any good or simply paint a target on her back. She decided to move carefully. Her coin purse was running low, so she found work in a scribe's shop, copying ledgers and letters for merchants. She was proficient enough in writing to earn a meager wage. At night, she pored over the parchments she had brought from Braavos, trying to glean more details. She practiced her Valyrian, searching for any mention of the name Remian that might link him directly to House Targaryen. The more she read, the more she realized that these exiles had not only parted ways with the main Targaryen line, they had actively opposed the cruelty of Valyria. They saw themselves as harbingers of mercy, a stark contrast to the proud dragon lords who reveled in blood magic and conquest. They believed that by serving the many-faced god, they could wash away the sins of their forefathers. Over time, the order had grown beyond that initial impetus, attracting people of all backgrounds. But the seeds of that hidden Targaryen connection remained for those who knew where to look. A few days into her stay in Pentos, she was confronted by a young man at the scribe's shop. He introduced himself as Gelario, an associate of one of the magisters. He mentioned that he had recognized the style of Nyrema's Valyrian script from some older texts. He asked, somewhat bluntly, if she was a student of Braavosi history. Nyrema froze, wondering if he was fishing for information. Yet she tried to remain calm, answering that she had studied briefly in Braavos. Gelario seemed intrigued, not threatening, and offered to show her something he had in his possession, a piece of old Valyrian jewelry. Against her better judgment, curiosity got the better of her. She followed him to his master's residence, a lavish estate near the city's outskirts. There, in a private study, Gelario produced an amulet shaped like a dragon's head with rubies for eyes. He said he had acquired it from a Braavosi merchant who claimed it was from a lost branch of Valyrian nobility. Nyrema's heart hammered. She recognized the same style as the ring she wore, though far more ornate. She carefully touched it, feeling a faint hum. Could it be connected to the same exiles? She told Gelario it was indeed Valyrian, but she said little else. Gelario smiled. I knew it. I have long suspected there are artifacts in Braavos pointing to a hidden story of Targaryen survival. You see, my master is fascinated by the notion that the Targaryens were not the only ones to flee the doom. He believes some of them became something else. He paused as if gauging her reaction. Of course, it's just a legend. Nyrema kept her features impassive, but inside she was roiling. She wondered how much Gelario knew, if he was a friend or a foe. She suspected that if she revealed her knowledge, she might gain his help or bring the wrath of powerful men. So she played ignorant, praising the amulet's craftsmanship, claiming she knew only that Braavos had old Valyrian connections. Gelario nodded, though a spark in his eyes suggested he suspected more. He mentioned that ships would soon sail for Westeros, specifically for Dragonstone, where the Targaryens still maintained a fortress. If you are ever curious, perhaps you should travel there, he said. They say the halls of Dragonstone still echo with ancient secrets. Nyrema swallowed, wondering if that was indeed her destiny. Her nights were plagued by dreams. She saw a regal fortress rising from the sea, shaped by ancient Valyrian arts. She saw shadows on the walls, dancing with the shapes of dragons, their roars echoing in the distance. She felt a burning heat in her blood. Sometimes she saw masked figures standing behind her, whispering that death follows. She would awaken trembling, the ring around her neck warm against her skin. Eventually, she could deny the pull no longer. She used her meager savings to book passage on a ship to Westeros. She told no one but left a brief note for Gelario, thanking him for his kindness and hoping their paths might cross again. The crossing was uneventful, save for her mounting anxiety. When the ship made landfall, she found herself just south of King's Landing, in the port town of Duskendale. She had never seen the Crownlands before, and the sight of the Red Keep perched high on its hill in the distance filled her with awe and dread. She knew the seat of the Targaryens lay in the capital and on Dragonstone, but she was uncertain how to proceed. She lingered in Duskendale for a time, doing odd copying jobs for local merchants. She learned of political tensions. Talk of rebellions, of Targaryen heirs disputing successions, of lords in open conflict. She had no allies, no resources beyond the hidden parchments and her ring. But in a small inn, she heard mention of a maester who had served a Targaryen prince once, a man rumored to be well-versed in Valyrian lore. The innkeeper said he was now retired and lived in a cottage near the coast, occasionally offering healing to local fisherfolk. Nyrema sought out that cottage. She found the old maester, name of Harwin, hunched and half-blind, but still sharp of mind. She told him she was a scholar of Valyrian history and that she needed help deciphering some old texts. The maester was cautious at first, but curiosity drew him in. She revealed the genealogical fragments, careful not to mention the faceless men. Harwin took his time, squinting at the brittle parchments, tracing faded ink with trembling fingertips. He confirmed that these records indeed appeared to link certain exiled Valyrian families to the Targaryens, though the lineage was tangled. Then Nyrema asked if he had ever heard the name Remian. He frowned. Long ago, in my youth at the Citadel, I read a curious treatise about lesser branches of House Targaryen. It mentioned a figure who left Dragonstone before the conquest, possibly named Remian Targaryen, though the record was incomplete. It was said he was disowned for reasons unknown, but I never found any direct mention of him in official genealogies. It was as if he had been erased. Nyrema's pulse quickened. Erased, she echoed. The maester nodded. House Targaryen was always mindful of its image, of its purity of line. Any black sheep or rebellious branch might have been conveniently forgotten. But if that man truly escaped to Bravos, as your parchments suggest, it stands to reason he might have founded some secret line there. He paused, glancing at the ring around Nyrema's neck. You wear a curious symbol. Where did you get it? She hesitated, then decided to trust him a little. I was found with it as an infant, she said quietly. In Old Town. It brought me here. The maester nodded, a gleam of compassion in his gaze. Perhaps this Remian was your ancestor, or perhaps not. Blood can be lost or mingled over the centuries, and Valyrians were scattered wide by the doom. But it seems you have a claim, at least in spirit, to their legacy. That word, legacy, echoed in her mind. For the first time, she wondered if she had any obligation to House Targaryen, or to the memory of Valyria. She was only one girl, friendless and half-broke. What could she possibly do with such knowledge? Harwin patted her hand, sensing her turmoil. Perhaps you should seek out Dragonstone. Its library might hold the records you need to confirm or deny your suspicions. If not there, then the royal library in the Red Keep. Nyrema weighed the danger. The Targaryens were powerful, but also embroiled in intrigues. If she appeared at their gates, claiming hidden blood ties, would she be welcomed or imprisoned? She knew enough of politics to sense the risk. Yet she had come too far to turn back. She set out under the guise of a traveling scribe heading for the port from which ferries traveled to Dragonstone. She carried false references forged by Harwin that claimed she was sent to assist the castle's maester with organizing the library. She prayed that the subterfuge would hold long enough for her to find what she needed. Along the way, she saw wagons carrying the wounded from skirmishes, heard talk of rebellious bannerlords. The realm felt restless on the edge of crisis. She tried to keep her head down. Upon reaching the port, she managed to secure passage on a small boat bound for Dragonstone. The imposing fortress rose from the sea, its towers shaped like dragons, dark and intimidating against the gray sky. Stepping onto its black rock causeway, she felt an otherworldly aura pressing in on her, a sensation that the stones themselves remembered Valyria. Her ring felt hotter against her chest. Guards demanded her business and she presented her forged papers. They inspected them, uncertain, but the stamps and seals seemed convincing enough. She was allowed entry, escorted by a wary steward to the castle's library. It was a somber place, lined with ancient tomes. The castle maester, a grave man named Lorien, eyed her suspiciously when she introduced herself as a scribe. But he assigned her to a corner desk, letting her help copy some genealogical texts. She could hardly contain her excitement. This was her best chance. Day by day, as she dutifully copied pages, she kept an eye out for any reference to Remian or the unnamed exiles. She suspected the Targaryens might have purged such records, but some clue must remain. Finally, after a week, she stumbled upon a reference in a thick volume detailing the earliest years on Dragonstone. It mentioned that a distant cousin of Enar Targaryen had refused to remain, calling the place a cage. That cousin vanished, never to be heard from again. No name was given, but the timeline fit Remian perfectly. Nyrema felt her heart pound. She read further, finding only a brief mention that the cousin believed the Valyrian freehold was doomed by its own hubris. He parted ways to search for redemption in the city of slaves freed Bravos. The text ended there, but it was confirmation enough. That night she stared out over the castle walls at the sea. A warm wind blew across the battlements, carrying the faint smell of salt and kelp. She realized that everything pointed to the truth of her suspicion. A small branch of Targaryens or near Targaryens had fled to Braavos, seeking to atone or hide. They became the seeds of the Faceless men, or at least heavily involved with that order. Over centuries, their original identity was lost in a swirl of masks, oaths, and devotion to the many-faced god. And she, Nyrema, might be one of their far-flung descendants. The scale of it overwhelmed her. She was so lost in thought that she did not notice the guard approach until he cleared his throat. She spun around, face pale. He informed her that His Grace's Master of Laws had arrived unexpectedly on Dragonstone and heard there was a new scribe in the library. The guard beckoned her to follow. Her heart hammered. She had no idea what the Master of Laws wanted with her, but it could not be good. She followed the guard through winding corridors, eventually entering a torchlit hall. At the far end stood a gaunt man dressed in fine velvets, a pin of office on his breast. His gaze was cold as it raked over her. "You are the scribe from Old Town, are you?" he asked, voice slick with mistrust. "Maester Lorien said you arrived with forged references." Nyrema's stomach twisted. So they had discovered her ruse. She attempted to deny it, but the man's lips curled into a sneer. "We are not fools. Who are you, truly? Why do you pry into the Targaryens' genealogical records?" A flicker of panic coursed through her. To lie further would do her no good. She had no choice but to gamble on the truth. She told him, haltingly, of her uncertain lineage, of a ring that bore a dragon's crest, of ancient rumors that a cousin of Enar Targaryen had founded a secret line. She expected to be laughed at or thrown in a cell. But the Master of Laws studied her intently. After a long silence he said, "A bold tale, perhaps too bold. If it is false, you're a cunning liar. If it is true, it is dangerous." His eyes flicked to the ring on the chain around her neck. "Let me see that." She placed it in his palm, her heart racing. He squinted at the half-erased dragon's head. A long sigh escaped him. "I have heard rumors of such a ring, rumored to be an heirloom of some lost Targaryen offshoot. But rumor is not proof. If you wish to plead your case, you must do it at the highest level. Or else you had best disappear before the lords of Th. Islan see you as a threat." He returned the ring. "Consider which path you prefer. I have no interest in your bloodline, but others will." He waved her away, leaving her escorted by guards back to the library. She was shaken. She realized she stood at a crossroads. She could attempt to present herself at court, perhaps to the Targaryen monarch, though that was fraught with peril. Or she could vanish, continuing her life in the shadows, hoping the Faceless men would never find her. That night, she could hardly sleep. She felt she was on the brink of a precipice, haunted by all she had learned. In her fitful slumber, she dreamt again of the masked phantoms swirling in the sky, each mask shifting from face to face, until she saw her own face among them. Then the dream changed. A figure appeared, draped in smoke, wearing a crown of black steel. It whispered, "The blood of dragons runs deep, and you will never escape it." She woke, sweat-drenched. Morning came with a cold drizzle. She gathered her parchments, her meager belongings, determined to leave before the Master of Laws changed his mind and had her arrested. But as she descended the library steps, she found a figure waiting in the corridor. Syrah, dressed not in a faceless man's cloak, but in a simple traveler's attire. Nyrema nearly cried out. Syrah placed a finger to her lips, gesturing for silence. They slipped away from prying eyes, tucking into a recess behind a tapestry. Nyrema stared at her, wide-eyed. "You followed me?" Syrah's gray eyes flicked over her. "Our order sees farther than you think. Some wanted you dead. I convinced them it was unnecessary. There are bigger matters at hand. The Targaryens are on the brink of civil strife. War is coming. That means the Faceless men will have work, perhaps on both sides. We prefer to remain neutral. But your presence, your rumored bloodline, complicates everything." Nyrema's heart pounded. "What do you want from me?" Syrah sighed softly. "I want you to live, child. The House of Black and White has no hold on you anymore. But others in our order might choose differently if you threaten our secrets. Listen carefully, the best path for you is to vanish. Let these truths stay buried. If you go before Targaryen lords and claim a hidden lineage, you will either be used as a pawn or silenced. But if you remain quiet, you may yet find a life of your own." Nyrema felt torn. Part of her longed to do as Sira advised, to walk away from all of it. Another part of her burned with a sense of destiny. I can't simply abandon the truth, she whispered. Valyria's doom was unleashed by greed and cruelty. The Targaryens fancy themselves survivors, but they repeat the errors of the past. If a fragment of that exiled line once sought redemption, don't they deserve to know? Sira studied her, face devoid of emotion. Then, unexpectedly, she stepped closer, taking Nyrema's hands in hers. You must decide what you can live with. If you seek to unravel the secrets of the Faceless men, you put yourself at risk. If you reveal yourself to the Targaryens, you risk becoming entangled in their bloody politics. Perhaps redemption lies not in speaking aloud these secrets, but in using them wisely. Or perhaps the flames of the past must be confronted, no matter the cost. Before Nyrema could respond, they heard footsteps. Sira melted away into the shadows with practiced grace, leaving Nyrema alone. She took the next ship away from Dragonstone, heading north. She did not know exactly where she was going, only that she needed time to think, to weigh her path. The ship took her to Gulltown in the Vale of Arryn, far from the Targaryen heartlands. There, she wandered among mountain paths, seeking a quiet place to gather her thoughts. She rented a small cottage near a lakeshore, making ends meet by writing letters for local folk. She tried to ignore the pang of longing that surfaced whenever she thought of her ring and her father's unknown line. But fate did not leave her in peace. One day, a raven arrived at the small outpost where she sometimes collected messages. The note was sealed with black wax, bearing no sigil. Within, she found a short message in High Valyrian: "You cannot hide from destiny. Remember the flames." There was no signature, but she guessed it was from Sira or another agent of the House of Black and White. She felt a cold dread. They were reminding her that her life was not her own. Death always waited, and their eyes were everywhere. She realized then that every attempt to bury the truth or run from it only increased the pressure. She found herself recalling the fragments of old exiles who turned their backs on Dragon Lord cruelty and embraced the worship of the many-faced god. But what if their original impetus to atone for Valyria's sins had been overshadowed by centuries of assassinations, of worshipping death without discrimination? Perhaps there was a middle path to honor the idea that the strong should not exploit the weak while also rejecting the blind neutrality of the Faceless men. She saw in her mind the two extremes of her heritage, one side all about power and dragons, the other about annihilation of identity. She could choose neither. Instead, she vowed to find her own way. If that meant forging alliances with those who believed in a just future, so be it. If that meant confronting the Targaryens or the Faceless men, she would do it on her own terms. An opportunity arrived when she met a traveling hedge knight, Ser Willem, who was headed to Riverrun. He offered her protection on the road if she helped write letters for him to local lords seeking service. She agreed. On the journey, she realized that the realm was indeed on the brink of deeper conflict. Whispers of a dragon dance on the horizon grew louder. Houses positioned themselves. She caught wind that the Targaryens themselves were divided into factions. If war erupted, old alliances and hidden resentments would come to light. She felt a pang of fear for what that might mean for her fragile secret. In times of war, a single rumor about hidden Targaryen heirs could lead to beheadings or worse. Yet something in her refused to cower. She traveled onward, determined to find a place in this unraveling tapestry. Her ring remained hidden beneath her collar, the silent symbol of a heritage that refused to be erased. Sometimes, at night, she touched it and recalled the pages of the genealogical records, the old chest and bravos, the mosaic of the dragon in the House of Black and White. There was a part of her that grieved for the noble dream of exiles who wanted to cleanse the sins of Valyria, who hoped that, by taking the faces of the dead, they could bring mercy to the oppressed. Reality had proven more complicated. Finally, she reached the Riverlands. Ser Willem parted ways with her there. She took a small barge up the Red Fork, drifting past farmland and war-scarred villages. The peasants spoke in hushed voices of the king's uncertain health, of new claimants, of roving bands of outlaws. Nyrema found fleeting work as a copyist wherever she could. She remained watchful, half expecting to see a masked figure at every turn. The House of Black and White had told her to stay silent, but she knew it was only a matter of time before events forced her hand. Her suspicion was confirmed one evening when she stopped at a riverside inn. A man approached her table, claiming to be a messenger from King's Landing. He sat without invitation, setting a hand on hers. "You carry knowledge that could sway the realm," he said in a low tone, as though he had looked into her soul. If the Targaryens learn of you, they might seek to use you or destroy you. Some lords would pay handsomely for the idea that there is a hidden Targaryen line that can be shaped into a puppet. A chill ran down her spine. How did he know? She pulled her hand away. I don't know what you mean, she lied. The man gave a soft, knowing laugh. Perhaps you don't. But if you ever wish to share your story, travel south. There are those who would protect you for a price. He left without another word, leaving behind a single silver coin stamped with a coiled dragon. She stared at it as dread coiled in her stomach. That night, she decided to keep moving, to never stay anywhere longer than a few days. She realized the realm's powers, be they Targaryen loyalists, rebellious lords, or mysterious agents, were sniffing around for any advantage in the Game of Thrones. Her rumored heritage was a potential chess piece, and she had no desire to become someone else's pawn. And yet, she also knew that the truth of the Faceless men's origins could reshape how people viewed the Targaryens and Valyria at large. The exiles had tried to break free from the cruelty that defined their homeland. Was it possible to carry that legacy forward in a constructive way? She traveled by back roads and hidden paths, forging a solitary existence. Autumn gave way to a bitter winter, and she found herself near the borders of the Vale once more, shivering in a borrowed cloak. She still had the parchments from Braavos, though they were more fragile every day. She considered burning them to protect herself. But she always stopped short, recalling the effort it had taken to retrieve them, the risk. They were the only tangible connection to her lost lineage. Snow fell thick, covering the hills in a silent shroud. One moonlit night, as she huddled in a dilapidated barn for shelter, she heard a voice outside call her name. Heart-pounding, she peered out the door. A lone figure stood amidst the snowdrifts, wearing a cloak of black and gray. She recognized the posture before she saw the face. It was Syrah again. Her presence felt both comforting and terrifying. Nyrema clutched the hilt of her dagger but did not draw it. Syrah spoke quietly. You run, yet you carry the secret with you. This winter is harsh, but the war to come is harsher still. If you wish to save yourself, you must bury the truth. Renounce the parchments. Renounce your claim. Become no one. Nyrema's eyes stung with tears. That is what the Faceless men did, isn't it? They became no one, so they could hide. But I do not wish to hide. I can't forget the dream of a Valyria redeemed. Syrah regarded her with an inscrutable gaze. Do you think you can redeem Valyria? A kingdom that is a grave of demons and ashes? You are but one girl. A fierce determination welled up in Nyrema. Valyria itself may be lost, but the sins of the past live on whenever the powerful exploit the powerless. Maybe the real redemption is standing against that exploitation, no matter the name or face I wear. Syrah gave a slight nod. Then I cannot dissuade you. But understand, your path puts you at odds with our creed. We serve the many-faced God, and we cannot allow you to endanger the House of Black and White. If you reveal our secrets, we will come for you. The threat was clear, but so was the faint sadness in her voice. Nyrema swallowed hard. I have no desire to reveal your secrets. But I won't deny the truth if asked. This is who I am. For a moment, silence stretched between them, the snowfall softening the world's edges. Then Syrah turned and walked away, disappearing into the swirling snow. Nyrema realized that was likely the last warning she would receive. She spent the remainder of winter in constant vigilance, forging alliances with minor knights or village elders when she could, offering her literacy in exchange for a place to stay. News trickled in of the Targaryen court fracturing, of rumors that war might erupt at any moment. But she also heard of those who championed a fairer realm, who sought to protect small folk from the worst ravages of lordly ambition. Nyrema felt drawn to that cause, seeing it as an echo of the exiles who had fled Valyria's cruelty. If she could help in any small way, perhaps that was her redemption. By the time spring arrived, she had made her way to a region near the Trident. There, she encountered a group of traveling septons who were delivering aid to villages suffering under harsh lordly taxes. Nyrema volunteered to help with their letters and records. While with them, she came across an older septon who claimed to have once studied in Braavos. Intrigued, she confided in him very carefully that she suspected a link between the Targaryens and the Faceless men. The septon turned pale, cautioning her never to speak such heresy. But when she pressed him, he admitted that he had seen a sealed manuscript in Braavos referencing the exiled scions of the dragon. According to legend, they had once tried to overthrow certain corrupt Valyrian lords. Failing, they fled to Braavos and joined an order that sought equality in death. The septon shrugged. Perhaps it's true, perhaps not. But the faceless men are no friend to those who poke around. That night, Nyrema found herself on a hillside overlooking a quiet stretch of the Trident's waters. She stared at the reflection of the half-moon shimmering on the river's surface. She touched her ring, remembering her dream of a redeemed Valyria. The path forward remained uncertain. If she tried to approach the Targaryen court openly, she might be dismissed or killed. If she tried to raise the banner of a hidden Targaryen lineage, she would be entangled in a war that could overshadow the realm. The faceless men were determined to preserve their creed, which meant they could kill her if they believed she endangered them. She was alone in this, an orphan of an orphaned heritage. Yet, as lonely as that realization was, it gave her clarity. She did not need the throne, the power of dragons, or the legion of assassins. She needed only to live with integrity, to fight for what she believed in, just as the original exiles had done. She could use her knowledge to counsel those who would listen, to warn them of the perils of repeating Valyria's mistakes. If the Targaryens marched towards civil war, she might do better to stay among the small folk, helping them survive the onslaught. For a moment, she imagined forging a new fellowship, one that took the best of the exiles' ideals: mercy, humility, the vow to protect the weak, and left behind the thirst for power and the cult of death. It was a fragile dream, but a hopeful one. Days melted into weeks as she traveled from village to village, earning a modest living as a scribe and teacher for children. She taught them their letters, telling them carefully sanitized tales of Valyria, stories of shining spires and cunning mages, balanced by cautionary lessons of hubris and cruelty. Now and then she felt the watchful eyes of strangers, glimpsed figures at the edge of her vision who vanished when she turned. But no one attacked her. Perhaps the time was not yet ripe. One afternoon, near a field where spring flowers had begun to bloom, she met a woman named Carys, a traveler from Essos who had lost her entire family to slavers. Carys had found refuge in Westeros but saw the seeds of the same tyranny here. Nyrema, moved by the woman's story, told her of Braavos, the city that once prided itself on being founded by slaves freed from Valyria. She omitted the more dangerous secrets but emphasized that no land was truly free from human vice. Carys nodded. "Then we must fight for the world we wish to see wherever we find ourselves," she said. The words resonated with Nyrema, stirring something in her chest. She found a sense of purpose in those next months, traveling with Carys and a few other wanderers who believed that the realm's brokenness could be mended by small acts of kindness and defiance. They helped villages ravaged by outlaws, negotiated with petty lords to lower cruel taxes, and if that failed, they quietly moved on. Nyrema no longer actively sought out Targaryen documents or direct confirmation of her lineage. She had gathered enough to know the truth in her heart, and that was sufficient. Yet the memory lingered, an ember burning at the edge of her consciousness. The faceless men's whispered vow to kill her if she endangered their secrecy, the Targaryens' precarious hold on power, and the knowledge that the exiled scions of Valyria had once tried to do good in a world gone mad. On solitary nights, she would dream of a great library filled with records of every life touched by the doom, every child who carried forward a fraction of that once glorious legacy. She imagined all those souls yearning for absolution. In her dreams, she sometimes saw Sira, maskless, placing her hand over Nyrema's heart as if granting permission to forge her own path. Seasons turned. Rumors of open conflict between Targaryen princes reached them. Some said dragons had taken to the skies again, that war was inevitable. Nyrema braced herself for a realm in flames. If the dragons fought each other, the small folk would suffer most. She and Carys traveled north, hoping to avoid the worst. But they found war had a way of spreading its tendrils everywhere. Eventually, Nyrema realized that to stand idly by was not an option. She had knowledge that could change the narrative. If the Targaryen lines were truly unraveling over who had the purest claim, then the knowledge that an entire offshoot had existed, one that abandoned Valyria's worst impulses, might prove relevant. Even if it was not recognized as legitimate, it could plant a seed of doubt among those who claimed absolute purity of blood. Maybe that seed of doubt could prevent some fraction of bloodshed. Or maybe it would stoke more conflict. She did not know. But she found herself longing to try. Without telling her companions, she penned a letter addressed to whichever Targaryen sat the throne, or if none did, to a prominent lord in King's Landing. In the letter, she laid out a carefully written account of the exiled scions, the genealogical records, the Braavosi artifacts. She did not name the faceless men but alluded to a hidden order of exiled Valyrians who had forsaken their house name. She ended the letter with a plea: remember that the power of dragons once enslaved thousands. Remember that not all who carried Valyrian blood reveled in tyranny. Find a way to break the cycle, or the realm will drown in fire and blood. She paid a messenger handsomely to deliver the letter in secret. She did not sign her real name, instead marking it with the image of a silver ring. Then she and Carys moved on. She doubted she would ever know if her letter reached its destination or if it mattered in the grand swirl of war. Perhaps she had sealed her own doom. If the letter fell into the wrong hands, the Faceless men might learn of her meddling. But she felt strangely liberated, as though she had finally done something worthy of her precarious inheritance. As the realm inched ever closer to chaos, Nyrema found a measure of peace in her small acts of charity, her forging of friendships with common folk, her quiet conviction that her ancestors, be they Targaryen or otherwise, did not define her. She had walked through shadows, from Old Town's libraries to Braavos' House of Black and White, from Dragonstone's fortress to snowbound barns in the Vale. She had glimpsed the darkest corners of Valyria's legacy and learned that the greatest threat was not magic or dragons, but the human capacity for cruelty or compassion. Sometimes, on a chilly evening, she would place a small candle in the window, a symbol of light amid encroaching darkness. She recalled the chest of old scrolls in Braavos and realized that truth, like fire, could warm or destroy depending on how it was wielded. She chose to wield it gently, to spark hope rather than burn the world. In so doing, she honored the memory of those exiles who had turned their backs on tyranny, seeking a new life in anonymity. She might never again step foot in the House of Black and White, but she carried their lesson. A face is a mask, and what matters is the soul behind it. Her story did not end with a coronation or a dragon ride, nor with a bloody knife in a dark corridor. Instead, it continued in the subtle ripples she made through a realm hungry for either conquest or mercy. The question of whether the Faceless men were Targaryens escaped from Valyria was answered, in her mind at least, yes and no. They had once possessed that blood, but they forsook it. Blood alone did not define them, nor did it define her. In the final measure, identity was a choice, one that sometimes demanded renunciation, sometimes demanded a fight. She thought of Syrah from time to time, wondering if the Faceless woman still watched over her from afar, ever ready to snuff out her life if she threatened to expose the secrets of Braavos. Perhaps Syrah's last warning had been a parting gift, an acknowledgement that Nyrema might choose a different fate. Perhaps, in some hidden chamber of the House of Black and White, there were elders who whispered her name, lamenting that their order had not clipped her wings when they had the chance. She took comfort in the idea that, despite all their power, they had chosen to let her go. Maybe they too saw the faint glimmer of the exile's original dream for mercy. In the hush of a spring morning, Nyrema stood at the edge of a field where green shoots had just begun to push through the thawed earth. A gentle breeze rustled her cloak. She closed her eyes and listened to the distant sound of a river flowing. The ring on her chest felt cool now, no longer burning with the unanswered questions of her past. She opened her eyes, breathed in the scent of new growth, and took a step forward. Whatever the realm's fate, whatever storms the dragons might unleash upon each other, she had chosen her own path, a quiet assertion that the sins of Valyria and the masks of the Faceless men need not define her. Her story would unfold in the margins, in small acts that might one day bloom into a kinder world. And if anyone ever asked, "Are the Faceless men former Targaryens escaped from Valyria?" she would smile and say that the truth is seldom a single face, and sometimes the blood of dragons beats in hearts that refuse to roar. Her life was proof enough of that. Nyrema woke to a clear dawn sky, the early sun painting the river's surface with hints of gold and silver. Her bed was no more than a small patch of flattened grass by the water's edge, but after so many weeks wandering with Carys and the others, she had grown accustomed to the roughness of the road. She sat up slowly, rolling her shoulders and blinking away the last traces of sleep. Across the camp, Carys was already awake, folding blankets and humming a low tune under her breath. Farther off, two of their new companions, Braddon and Septon Eldon, were making ready to depart, strapped bedrolls slung across tired shoulders. Birds flickered through the branches overhead, leaving behind a cascade of chirps that felt almost cheerful. Spring had truly come, banishing the worst of the cold, yet Nyrema couldn't banish the ice that settled in her gut. All across the riverlands, the tension was palpable. She had heard travelers speak of the king's precarious health, of princes each rallying their allies, of black and green banners being readied in hidden armories. War was not only rumored but certain. She had spent her life searching for truths about Valyria and her own lineage, only to find that her timing could not have been more dangerous. Sometimes she wondered if the realm's onrushing chaos was partly her doing, as though her very presence were a small shard of an old and cursed legacy. Yet she knew better than to place all blame upon herself. The seeds of strife had been sown long ago in the hearts of proud lords and ambitious royals. She was just another leaf caught in the swirling storm. With a faint sigh, she stood, brushed bits of grass from her simple traveling gown and joined Carys at the campfire's remnants. Carys offered her a slight smile. "Sleep well?" asked the older woman. She wore her hair braided back, the faint streaks of gray near the temples a testament to her years of hardship under the yoke of Associ slavers. Yet her eyes still shone with quiet strength. "Well enough," Nyrema murmured. She knelt by the fire pit and stirred the ashes with a stick. "We'll have to find a village soon, somewhere we can get provisions." Carys nodded. "Braden said there's a town not far from here, about half a day's walk. We can try our luck there, see if we can earn a meal or two in exchange for your scribing and my healing. Or perhaps the Septon can sway a local reeve to part with some bread." Nyrema tried to smile, but worry pulled her lips downward. She glanced at the ring around her neck hidden under her bodice. The chain felt cool against her skin. Even if she told herself she was safe, she never quite believed it. The note she had sent to King's Landing signed only with the image of a silver ring could very well have fallen into the wrong hands. The sense of being watched lurked everywhere she went, though no masked assassin had yet appeared. She did not doubt that if war broke out in earnest, the Faceless men would accept contracts from all sides. Perhaps in that maelstrom she would become unimportant, overshadowed by the realm's larger tragedies. As she and Carys began to pack, Septon Eldon approached, shoulders stooped. He was a thin man in his 40s, with a large scar bisecting his left eyebrow. He'd earned it in his youth, defending a village from bandits before he'd taken holy vows. Despite his somewhat grim appearance, Eldon had a gentle manner that put common folk at ease. He tugged on his threadbare cloak, clearing his throat. "We should be off before the roads crowd with travelers," he said, voice soft. "Word is, some lord's men are already riding through these parts, conscripting any able-bodied youth for the coming conflict." Braden joined them, grunting in agreement. He was a huge man with hands like bear paws, quick to laugh but fierce when threatened. He'd fought in a few border skirmishes under an old banner and then had drifted into the Riverlands, claiming he had no taste for shedding more blood. "I'd rather keep this group out of any lord's chain of command," he growled, hoisting his worn satchel over his shoulder. "We do more good this way, small though it is." Nyrema appreciated their presence, each of them scarred by the realm's cruelties in different ways, yet determined to carve out a space for compassion. She was reminded of the exiled Valyrians who had once ventured to Bravos, seeking to atone for the sins of their blood. Perhaps, in another life, those exiles had done small acts of mercy too. But the House of Black and White had overshadowed their initial dream, turning mercy into an impartial gift of death rather than an active force for good in the living world. She found herself determined to do better, to live up to the potential that her ancestors, however distant, had glimpsed. They set off along the riverbank, following a beaten track that meandered westward. The morning sun rose higher, warming Nyrema's shoulders through her cloak. A scattering of wildflowers dotted the edges of the path. In the distance, hills rolled gently, broken only by the occasional line of trees or the silhouette of a windmill. The Riverlands, for all its tumult, held a rugged beauty in spring, as if it forgot for a moment that war so often trampled its fields. They walked for hours, speaking little. Braden hummed a half-remembered tune from his soldiering days. Septon Eldon led them in a short prayer for safe travel. Nyrema found her mind drifting back to Bravos, to the quiet gloom of the House of Black and White. She remembered the candles flickering on stone walls, the hush that clung to the place like a living thing, and the mosaic of the dragon in the secret corridor. For all the fear that Temple had instilled, she couldn't forget the ache of fascination she had felt. There was a certain purity in the Faceless men's devotion, even if it veered toward darkness. She wondered if Syrah still walked those halls or if she had taken a new face. She wondered if the elders there ever considered the possibility that the world could be saved by life, not death. At midday, they spotted a plume of smoke just beyond a ridge, hinting at habitation. Following the path, they emerged onto a wider road leading into a modest town nestled in a shallow valley. A wooden palisade encircled it, though the gate stood open. Guards in ill-fitting leather jerkins eyed them warily but allowed them to pass once Septon Eldon introduced himself. Within, they found a cluster of timber buildings arranged around a muddy square. Chickens pecked in the dirt and a handful of townsfolk bustled about with baskets of produce. It seemed peaceful enough at first glance, but Nyrema noticed a tension in the air. People moved quickly, glancing over their shoulders as though they half expected trouble to walk through the gate. A young woman carrying a bundle of sticks gaped at Braden's massive frame, then scurried away when he offered a friendly wave. Even Carys, who usually drew warmth from others with her calm demeanor, was met with skittish looks. War had sown suspicion in every corner. They made their way to the local sept, a modest stone structure with a green-tiled roof. It was the sturdiest building in town, and inside, a single statue of the mother stood behind a rough wooden altar. A tired-looking Septon, older than Eldon, greeted them. He introduced himself as Septon Carlin, apologizing that the town had little to offer by way of hospitality. "We've had bandits on the roads," he explained, wringing his hands. "And the men of Lord Gawain have come twice already, rounding up any strong arms they can find. The folk here are afraid." Septon Eldon nodded sympathetically. "Is there a reeve or headman we might speak to? We have small skills to offer, my words, Carrie's healing, and Nyrema's scribing, perhaps in exchange for bread and a roof tonight." Septon Carlin agreed to arrange a meeting. Soon they were ushered into the presence of a short, stocky man named Jorley, who wore a leather apron and carried a harried expression. He was both the blacksmith and the reeve, or so he told them, because the town couldn't afford more than one official. Jorley sized them up with skeptical eyes. "Another band of wanderers," he grumbled. "You'll not find much charity here, but if you can help with tasks the townsfolk fear to do, we'll feed you for a day or two." Eager to prove their goodwill, Nyrema volunteered to help record the births and deaths in the town's log, which had apparently fallen out of order. Carys offered her healing knowledge to the ill or injured. Braddon swung his huge arms meaningfully, suggesting he could stand guard at the gates. Within an hour, they were set to various tasks, grateful for the chance to be useful. Nyrema found herself in a cramped back room of the sept, hunched over a rickety table stacked with parchment. She carefully dipped a quill into ink and began sorting through the disorganized records, haphazard notes of births, marriages, harvest tallies, and the occasional mention of local disputes. Though it was tedious, she felt a quiet satisfaction in bringing order to these little pieces of the townspeople's lives. Each name, each date, was a testament that these folk existed, that they loved and struggled and endured. She remembered her own childhood in Old Town, how she had pored over musty tomes seeking the faintest hint of her parentage. Life was so fragile, people were born, they lived, they died, and without scribes, their stories vanished. She paused when she came across a reference to a traveling child left at the gates. A memory flickered, she too had been left at the Citadel's gates. But that was decades ago. This record was from just a year past, describing how a small boy had appeared with no family. Her chest tightened. The entry ended with "taken in by Goodwife Arley." The child's name was listed simply as Bryn. Another lost soul in a realm that seemed to gather such orphans like fallen leaves. She tried to swallow the knot in her throat and continued her work. By dusk, she emerged from the stuffy room to find Carys treating a farmer's sprained wrist in the main hall of the September. Braddon was nowhere to be seen, likely still patrolling the gate or chatting up the guards. Septon Eldon was deep in conversation with Septon Carlin, heads bent close together. Carys glanced up from her patient as Nyrema approached. "Any progress?" she asked softly. Nyrema nodded. "I've made sense of most of their records, though it will take me another day to properly bind and catalog them." It felt good, actually, to help. Carys gave a faint smile, finishing her makeshift splint and tying it off with a strip of linen. The farmer mumbled his thanks, and she directed him to rest. Once he was gone, Carys turned her full attention to Nyrema. "I spoke with a few villagers. They say that Lord Gawain's men have begun to conscript forcibly, and they demand taxes in the form of grain and livestock more than these folk can afford." "It's always the same story," Nyrema murmured. "The lords must feed armies and the small folk bleed." Carys nodded. "Yes, but times may be worse than we realized. Rumor is that one Targaryen prince has already raised a banner in open defiance of another. The lords swear fealty to one side or the other, and the Riverlands is likely to become a battlefield again." Nyrema felt a chill. She thought of the letter she'd sent to the capital, of the genealogical records from Bravos, of her ring that might brand her a claimant, or at least a curiosity. "We should be careful," she said. "If tensions escalate, travelers like us might be suspected of espionage or anything else. People do strange things when fear takes hold." "Agreed," Carys said. "We'll stay here only as long as we must. Then we move on." They lapsed into thoughtful silence, broken only by Septon Eldon coming over to murmur that Jorley had offered them a place to sleep in the smithy's loft. The rest of the evening passed quietly. They shared a simple meal of bread and watery stew with the Septons. Then, weary from their travels, they made their way to the smithy's loft. The straw bedding there smelled faintly of horse and sweat, but it was warm, and after weeks on the road, Nyrema found it almost luxurious. Sometime near midnight, she awoke to the sound of distant hooves pounding the dirt. She froze, holding her breath. Something was happening outside. She could hear Braddon stir, rolling up onto his elbow. Carys, too, shifted awake while Septon Eldon struggled to stand from his makeshift bed. Voices, shouts, then a faint horn blast. Alarm! The loft's single window offered a glimpse of torches bobbing outside the palisade. Nyrema's pulse raced. She could almost taste the fear thickening in the air. Slipping from her blankets, she hurried down the narrow ladder to the smithy floor. Braddon was right behind her, buckling on a battered sword belt, though he had sworn never to kill again unless forced. Carys clutched her healing satchel, expression pinched. Outside, in the flickering light of torches, they found Jorli and a handful of town guards confronting a small band of riders at the open gate. The riders wore dingy tabards that might once have borne a sigil, but the design was too caked with dirt and old blood to decipher. Their leader, a narrow-faced man with a scar across his jaw, pointed a sword at Jorli. "Move aside," the man growled. "We'll have what we need and we'll be gone. Refuse and we'll gut your town from one end to the other." Nyrema's heart pounded. Not bandits, precisely. They looked more like deserters or roving mercenaries. Their eyes held a wild, desperate gleam. Perhaps they had served one side or the other in the brewing Targaryen conflict and decided to take what they could. "We have almost nothing," Jorli said, voice trembling. "We're taxed to the bone." "You'll give us weapons then," the scar-faced rider hissed. "The blacksmith can forge more if needed. Food, coin, steel, take your pick. We are no beggars, we are soldiers. We'll seize what we want, or is that unclear?" Braddon stepped forward, broad shoulders tense. "There's no need for violence. These people are just farmers and craftsmen. Be on your way." The scar-faced man sneered. "And who are you to order us? Another hedge knight? Step aside." A hush fell. Nyrema feared bloodshed. She glanced around, noticing that some of the guards were shaky with fear. They might break under the threat. She saw Carys standing at her elbow, face set in quiet resolve. Could they do anything? Would appealing to reason help? She swallowed. Before anyone else could speak, a woman in the band of riders spurred her horse forward. She carried a crossbow leveled at Braddon. "We're not here for talk," she said, her voice low. "We need arms, money, and a place to rest. You'll give it, or we'll take it." Nyrema felt that old helplessness rising in her chest. She remembered the vow she had made to stand for mercy and justice, even in small ways. Could she do anything but watch? Her hand drifted to her ring, hidden beneath her bodice. Could she muster the courage to speak? Then Septon Eldon stepped forward, arms raised in a gesture of peace. "I beg you to reconsider," he said gently. "You are men and women with hearts yet beating. Look at these folk, mothers, fathers, children. They have nothing to spare. If you take from them by force, you doom them to starvation." Scarface spat on the ground. "They're doomed anyway if war's coming. We've walked away from serving a lord who'd feed us scraps while the High Lords feast. We've bled for Targaryen coin and now we're done. Is that a sin, Septon?" "You have the right to live," Eldon replied. "But please let me mediate. If we gather what little supplies the town can muster, grain or old steel, will you give us your word that no harm will come to these people?" The bandits exchanged dark glances, uncertain. The crossbow-wielding woman lowered her weapon a fraction. Then a new voice spoke from the rear of the band. "We might accept that, if there's enough to keep us satisfied." The speaker urged his horse forward, and the group parted to reveal him. Nyrema's pulse leapt to her throat. He wore no helm, but a hooded cloak draped over his shoulders, and his face was partially concealed by shadows. Even so, she saw something in his angular features that gave her pause. A calm, almost too cool expression, as if he was amused by the entire scenario. Then the torchlight shifted, illuminating him more fully. She couldn't help a sharp intake of breath. His face bore a swirling scar across his left cheek, twisting the corner of his mouth into a perpetual half-smile. It was a face she had glimpsed once, in passing, back in Bravos. A man stepping through the corridors of the House of Black and White. She remembered the way he'd glanced at her, eyes gleaming with knowledge. If that memory served, he was one of them. Nyrema's mind whirled. Could a faceless man be leading these raiders? Or was this simply some trick of her imagination? He caught her staring, and a faint grin tugged at his mouth, revealing teeth that glinted in the torchlight. She sensed a trap. Faceless men could wear any semblance, but if he truly was from that order, why reveal himself now, in the company of desperate outlaws? "Sira warned me," she thought, her heart pounding. They could come from any dire. Tyon. She found her breath quickening. She knew she had to keep calm, had to hide her recognition. Beside her, Carys shifted uneasily, oblivious to Nyrema's alarm. Braden tensed, scanning for a way to defuse the situation. The hooded man dismounted with graceful ease. He approached Jorli, stepping past the crossbow woman. In a lazy tone, he said, "Gather what you can. We'll wait till morning. If it's sufficient, we'll leave with no blood spilled." Jorli's face flushed with anger, but he nodded reluctantly. "Fine. Just leave the sept and the children alone. We'll see what we can spare." The hooded man's grin widened, though his eyes remained cold. Agreed. No one was fooled by the polite veneer. Death hung in the air, kept at bay by a flimsy promise. The riders guided their horses to a makeshift camp outside the gate, obviously prepared to charge in if the townsfolk tried any trick. The guards closed the gate but didn't bar it, evidently fearing further provocation. Tension thrummed through the night. Jorli began marshalling men to collect battered old farming tools and leftover grain. Meanwhile, Septon Eldon quietly offered prayers for peace. Carys found a few women sobbing in the street, terrified of what morning might bring, and she tried to console them. Nyrema lingered near the edge of the square, eyes locked on the gate. The hooded man's appearance could not be coincidence. She thought of Sira telling her, "Some among us want your blood spilled." Could this be one of them? He had not confronted her directly. Perhaps he was biding his time. Or perhaps he had fallen away from the Order's discipline, forging his own path. The latter felt unlikely. The Faceless men rarely abandoned their creed. Braden came up beside her, expression grim. "This is a bad situation," he muttered. "I've seen men like them before, hungry, angry, with nothing to lose. If the town can't satisfy their demands, blood will run." Nyrema nodded, mind racing. "There's something else. Their leader," she said, speaking softly. "I fear he may be more dangerous than we realize. If dawn comes and they feel cheated, they could kill everyone here." Braden's lips pressed together. "We might slip away, but I doubt the townsfolk can. They'd hunt us down anyway." She clenched her fists, torn by indecision. She had no illusions about her ability to single-handedly stop these bandits, let alone the possibility that they were led by a faceless man. But she couldn't walk away. Not after all she'd seen, all she'd vowed. "Let's see how the night unfolds," she said finally. "We'll do what we can to help Jorli get them something. Maybe it'll be enough to avert disaster." Braden nodded reluctantly, though his broad face was etched with worry. They assisted Jorli in gathering old swords, mostly rusted or chipped, and a few battered shields. The blacksmith's forge, locked tight for the night, held a small store of workable iron. But that was the town's lifeblood used to repair plows and horseshoes. Giving it away would cripple them. Even so, Jorli reluctantly pulled open the doors, letting the bandits take what they wished. Better to lose iron than lives. By the time the meager pile was collected, the night was deep, and the townsfolk retreated to their homes, most too frightened to sleep. Nyrema, Carys, Braden, and Septon Eldon gathered in the smithy's yard, quietly debating what more they could do. The impetus to flee warred with the desire to protect these people. Carys frowned, pressing a hand to her forehead. "If they realize the steel is of poor quality, if the grain is not enough." Septon Eldon pursed his lips. "Violence is likely, but we can keep trying to negotiate in the morning." They were interrupted by a sudden movement in the shadows. Nyrema turned, heart in her throat, to see the hooded man leaning against the side of the smithy, arms folded. He had entered through the unbarred gate in utter silence. At this distance, the torchlight from the street cast dancing shadows over his scarred cheek. Up close, his presence was unnerving, as though he were a shadow given flesh. "I do love a good negotiation," he said in a quiet, mocking voice. "But you won't appease my companions with scraps." He looked at Nyrema, a strange light flickering in his dark eyes. "You, though, you've traveled far, I suspect. Your manner is too measured for a simple villager. You have some secrets up your sleeve?" Nyrema's stomach churned. She struggled to maintain composure, forcing an even tone. "I'm only a scribe, traveling with them. We're no threat." He pushed off the wall, stepping closer. Braden bristled, shifting as if ready to intervene. The hooded man ignored him. He circled Nyrema slowly, as if appraising her. "A scribe," he echoed, "with posture like a courtier and eyes that never miss a detail. And that ring around your neck, interesting." Her heart thundered. She realized her chain had slipped into view. She tried to tuck it away, but it was too late. A corner of the silver glinted in the torchlight. The man's half-smile deepened. If he was indeed connected to the Faceless men, he might know exactly what that ring signified. She licked her lips, struggling for a casual tone. A token from my father, that's all. His voice dropped to a near whisper. It's a curious token, wouldn't you say? I've seen many rings in my travels, this one has a story design. Then, abruptly, he snapped his gaze to Braden. Stay out of this, big man. I've no quarrel with you, yet. Braden held the man's stare, knuckles clenched, but said nothing. Septon Eldon and Carys remained tense, ready to intervene if the stranger attempted violence. For a moment, the night air seemed to still, the hush broken only by the distant crackle of a torch. Then the hooded man stepped back. We ride at first light. If your blacksmith gathers enough steel, we won't harm him or his people. But I suspect you have something more valuable, scribe. Perhaps knowledge, or coin, or something else you could trade. Think on it. Nyrema forced herself to nod, though her thoughts were spinning in turmoil. He offered a mocking little bow, then turned on his heel and vanished into the darkness as silently as he'd arrived. For a few moments, none of them spoke. Then Braden exhaled sharply. I don't like this. The nerve of that one. Are you sure you don't know him? Nyrema's throat felt tight. I'm not sure of anything. But I suspect he might be more dangerous than typical outlaws. She explained in a hushed voice about her suspicion he was tied to Bravos, to the shadowy order that had once nearly claimed her life. Carys paled, Septon Eldon sighed, and Braden cursed under his breath. All the more reason for us to leave under cover of darkness, Carys said, voice trembling. He singled you out, Nyrema. The rest of us might pass unnoticed, but he recognized you or your ring. Nyrema shook her head. If we leave, these people will be defenseless. I can't bear that. But also, if we stay, we might be dooming them. He's probably here for me or for the ring. The question is what he wants with it. Septon Eldon clasped his hands together. We might attempt a ruse, give him something that appears valuable, so they'll depart. Braden grimaced. But if he is who Nyrema thinks, no ruse will fool him for long. A silent tension settled among them, each grappling with the dire possibilities. Then Nyrema lifted her chin, forcing resolution into her voice. We'll see how the morning goes. I have to believe that reason might yet save these folk. If I can distract him or buy them time to flee, I'll do it. No one argued further, though their expressions were grim. They returned to the loft, trying in vain to catch a bit of rest before dawn. Nyrema lay awake, staring at the roof beams. Her mind kept drifting to Syrah and the genealogical records. She thought of the vow those exiles had once made, to be instruments of mercy, not cruelty. Now, so many centuries later, here was a man who might share that blood, or might share in the order that grew from it. Yet he used violence and intimidation like a blade at the throat of innocence. She felt an anger burning deep within her. Perhaps it was the dragon's blood, if she truly carried it, that refused to bow to tyranny even in this small corner of the realm. She must have dozed off at some point, for she woke to a pale glimmer of light filtering through the loft's window. Outside, she heard the restless neighing of horses and the rustle of movement. Braden was already awake, rummaging through their pack. Carys and Septon Eldon were quietly conferring in the corner. None of them looked well rested. Nyrema pulled on her boots and smoothed her hair as best she could, her heart hammering. It's time, she muttered. Together, they descended the ladder and stepped out into the early morning chill. The sun was barely a rim of gold behind the eastern hills. In the courtyard, townsfolk scurried about, piling old weapons and sacks of barley. The fear in their eyes was palpable. At the gates, the hooded man and his riders waited, their horses stamping nervously in the muddy ground. Jorli approached Nyrema with a heavy sigh. We've got them what we can. If it's not enough. Seven, help us. She nodded, placing a hand on his arm. Be calm. We'll do our best. Then she moved toward the gate, flanked by Carys and Braden. Septon Eldon followed, determined to offer moral support if nothing else. Scarface eyed them warily, crossbow woman spat on the ground, but the hooded man rode forward with that same predatory grace. Let's see what you have for us, he said softly. Jorli gestured to the pile, half a dozen rusted swords, a few chipped axes, a battered shield, and a meager sack of grain. The hooded man surveyed the offerings, face unreadable. After a moment, he dismounted, rummaging through the swords with his boot. He picked up one battered blade, tested its edge, then tossed it aside with a sneer. Scrap metal, he said, not looking at Jorli. His gaze flicked to Nyrema. Is this supposed to pacify my men? Jorli blanched. It's all we have. We're just farmers. The hooded man shook his head slowly. It won't do. We've risked coming here, and we've risked crossing bigger lords. We want more. Coin, or something better than these worthless swords. He lifted a foot and stomped on the nearest blade, snapping it. A hiss rippled among his companions. Nyrema felt her pulse pound in her ears. She could almost feel the townsfolk behind her wilting in despair. She stepped forward, voice trembling only slightly. "What do you really want?" He turned to her, a faint spark dancing in his eyes. "I want to be paid for my troubles," he said, "and I suspect you have something that might serve as payment." His gaze lowered pointedly to the chain at her neck. She swallowed. "This ring is just a family heirloom. It has no real value." The corners of his mouth twitched. "The best lies always contain a kernel of truth. But I know better, scribe. Let me see it." Her heart squeezed in her chest. If she refused, the riders might attack. If she handed over the ring, would it even appease them? Or would it damn her in some way she couldn't foresee? She thought of the genealogical texts. The ring was not only a link to her heritage, it was also a symbol of everything she'd learned. Could she part with it? She felt the eyes of the townsfolk on her, the tension coiling like a snake about to strike. Braddon stepped forward, hand on his sword hilt. The crossbowwoman leveled her weapon at him. Carys let out a small gasp. Septon Eldon raised his arms in a soothing gesture. It was a fragile standoff, ready to explode. Nyrema forced herself to breathe. Slowly, she reached up, unfastened the thin chain, and held the ring out in her palm. The hooded man stepped closer, ignoring Braddon's scowl, and plucked it from her hand. He examined the faint dragon crest, half erased by time, then looked at her with a knowing smile. "So the rumors are true," he murmured in high Valyrian, too softly for most to hear. "Blood of dragons, that you carry. But how pure, I wonder." She stiffened. He had spoken in that ancient tongue with ease, letting her know that he recognized the ring's import. She replied in the same language, her voice trembling, "If you are who I think you are, you have no right to this. You are a betrayer of your vows." He gave a low chuckle, stepping back so the others couldn't hear them clearly. "Vows? We serve the many-faced God in our own ways. My vow is to carve out a place in this world, one that doesn't bow to illusions of fealty." His voice lowered, almost conspiratorial. "Tell me, do you truly believe this ring is worthless?" She swallowed her rage. "I believe it is worthless to you. But to me, it's a sign of who I might be." He tilted his head, flicking his gaze to the frightened townsfolk. Then, in the common tongue, he lifted the ring. "This will do for a start, but not enough for the entire band. What else can you offer?" Carys opened her mouth as if to protest, but Nyrema held up a hand, silently pleading for patience. She forced herself to remain composed. "We can give you coin, what little we have. And if your men need rest, we can ask the reeve to open the storehouse. But we beg you not to harm these people." The crossbowwoman sneered. "Coin is better than rusted steel. Let's have it." Septon Eldon stepped forward, rummaging in his robe for the small purse he carried. Braddon offered up a few silver stags he'd earned from mercenary work. Carys had only a single silver coin to her name, which she relinquished with a resigned sigh. It was a pitiful amount overall, and Nyrema knew it. The hooded man's expression soured when he saw the meager coins. "It'll do for now," he said, tucking the ring into a pouch at his belt. "Gather it all. We'll take your coin, and we'll leave without razing your village, assuming no one tries anything foolish." He turned to Scarface and the others. "Load that scrap steel anyway. We might be able to sell it for smelting elsewhere." A wave of tense relief rippled through the townsfolk, though fear lingered in their eyes. One by one, the outlaws began gathering up the sacks and battered blades. The hooded man mounted his horse again, glancing at Nyrema with something akin to amusement. "It seems you've bought your lives this morning. But the realm is vast, and we'll meet again, scribe. As for that ring, I'll keep it safe in case you realize how high its true cost might be." He gave a mocking bow, then spurred his horse forward, leading his band away from the gate. The thunder of hooves receded down the road, and the dust settled. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Jorli exhaled loudly, slumping with relief. The townsfolk began to murmur, some weeping quietly in the aftermath of the tension. Septon Eldon murmured a prayer of thanks to the Seven for averting bloodshed. Carys wrapped her arms around Nyrema, voice trembling. "Your ring. Are you all right?" Nyrema stood rigid, heart pounding as though she'd run miles. Yes," she managed, though an emptiness spread through her chest. She had carried that ring her entire life, the one link to her murky lineage, to the Targaryen exiles who had once fled the doom. Now it was gone, clutched by a man who might serve or subvert the House of Black and White, a man with no apparent scruples. She closed her eyes, forcing herself to focus on the fact that the village had been spared. No one lay dead in the street. That was a victory, but it felt hollow. The ring's absence was like the loss of a limb. Braddon laid a hand on her shoulder. "They're gone for now. You saved lives by giving it up, Nyrema. She swallowed, struggling to steady her voice. It's a small price to pay if it protected these people. Even as she said it, a part of her grieved. That ring was more than an heirloom. It was a compass pointing to her identity. Without it, she felt unmoored. Septon Eldon gently guided Jorli to a bench, offering him water. Carys began checking on townsfolk who had fainted or were wounded from the night's stress. Braddon helped gather the scattered coins that had fallen in the dirt. Meanwhile, Nyrema lingered near the gate, gazing after the bandits' dust trail with a mixture of anger and regret. She half expected the man to turn around, to reappear in a swirl of horse hooves, but the road remained empty. Finally, she turned away, resolving that she wouldn't let this break her. The ring might be gone, but her mind was not. She still remembered the genealogical texts, the old scrolls in Bravos, the name Remian scrawled in archaic Valyrian. She still knew who she was, someone who refused to let the cruelty of the world define her path. Hours later, as the morning wore on and the townsfolk began to resume a semblance of normal life, Nyrema helped calm the children who had been awakened by shouting and horses. They peered up at her with wide, anxious eyes. Some clung to her skirt as though sensing she had played a role in saving them. She offered quiet words of reassurance, though her own heart still pounded with the memory of that hooded man's mocking smile. When midday came, Jorli quietly asked the travelers to depart. He was grateful for their help, but he feared that, as long as they remained, trouble would follow. Septon Eldon agreed that it was time to move on, especially given the man's interest in Nyrema. The townsfolk had no appetite for more danger. So the four of them gathered their meager belongings. Jorli gave them each a small loaf of bread for the road as a token of thanks and apologized for not being able to offer more. They left the town behind, slipping through the gate under a bright midday sun that felt at odds with the tension of the morning. Braddon led the way, jaw tight. Carys and Septon Eldon walked side by side, occasionally exchanging worried glances with Nyrema. None of them spoke for a while, each lost in thought. Only when they were a mile or two from the palisade did Carys break the silence. "What will you do about the ring?" she asked, concern evident in her tone. Nyrema stared down at her empty hands. "I don't know. I can't exactly march after them and demand it back." He was no ordinary outlaw. Septon Eldon nodded. "If your suspicion is correct and he is indeed a faceless man or associated with them, confronting him would be ill-advised." A bitter laugh escaped Nyrema's lips. "That's putting it mildly." Braddon let out a heavy sigh. "We might not be able to get the ring back, but we can make sure they don't catch us off guard again. We'll avoid main roads, keep to byways, and stay alert." "We need a plan," Carys added gently. "If the ring was your link to your heritage, what does losing it mean for you? Do you still want to search for other clues?" Nyrema's eyes clouded. She remembered the genealogical fragments she still carried, tucked in her pack. They were battered, but legible enough for a learned maester to confirm her lineage if it came to that. "I still have my knowledge." "The ring was mostly symbolic," she said, though her voice wavered. "Part of me wonders if this is a sign. Maybe I should accept that I don't need to prove my bloodline, that I can do good without brandishing a Targaryen crest." Septon Eldon placed a hand over hers. "Indeed, child. Your worth is not bound to that ring." They trudged on, though the day felt heavier than before. Nyrema wrestled with a swirl of emotions. She pictured the hooded man flicking her ring from hand to hand, mocking her. Perhaps he would sell it or discard it. Or perhaps he intended to use it as levera. In some twisted scheme. The more she thought about it, the more her anger rose. If he was a renegade from the Faceless men, or operating with their tacit approval, he might have his own designs on the realm's fate. They walked until twilight, when the fields around them gave way to a sparse woodland. Deciding to make camp rather than risk traveling at night, they set up their bedrolls beneath a tall oak. Braddon hunted for firewood, returning with an armful of branches. Carys prepared a simple meal of the bread Jorli had given them, along with a little dried meat. The mood was subdued, each of them unable to banish the memory of the morning's threat. As they ate, Septon Eldon tried to spark conversation about faith and hope, urging them not to let despair take hold. Carys spoke of her days in Essos, how she'd endured captivity under slavers and never lost her will to be free. Braddon recalled a night he'd spent on the stepstones, battling pirates. He'd thought it the worst night of his life, until the next day, when a fierce storm had nearly claimed his ship. "We survive," he concluded simply, "or we give in." When it came Nyrema's turn, she wasn't sure what to say. She gazed at the small campfire, the flames licking the darkness, and thought about the thread of her life. Old Town to Bravos, Bravos to Dragonstone, Dragonstone to the roads of Westeros. Each step had revealed more secrets about Valyria, the faceless men, and her own uncertain blood. She remembered how, as a child, she'd prayed for any clue about her family. Now she knew more than she ever expected, but at times, that knowledge felt like a curse. So she told them about the day she first found the genealogical margin note that set her on this path. The sense of wonder, the trembling hope. "I thought discovering my lineage would give me direction," she said softly. "But in truth, it's only led me into deeper mysteries. Perhaps the only real direction we have is how we choose to treat those around us. Today I lost my ring. That might be best if it prevents further harm." She paused, swallowing. "But I can't forget that man's eyes. I fear he won't leave this alone. He'll keep that ring as some kind of token, maybe sell the knowledge of it." Braddon nodded grimly. "We'll stay alert. If he tries to find us again, we'll be ready." None of them openly voiced the deeper fear, that the House of Black and White might be sending these agents to watch or manipulate her. A hush settled over their little circle, punctuated by the crackle of the fire. Eventually, Carys suggested they turn in for the night. They took turns on watch, all of them feeling a prickling awareness that the bandits or someone else might track them. Yet the night passed without disturbance. The morning dawned cold and gray, with the promise of rain in the air. They continued westward, deciding to head toward a region rumored to be calmer, near the edges of the Vale. Perhaps they could find a peaceful village untouched by conflict. The roads were lonely and the few travelers they passed warned of gathering tensions further south. One old man pushing a handcart full of turnips said he'd heard talk that 2 Targaryen princes were each claiming to be the rightful heir, dividing the realm. "I say let the dragons fight each other," he muttered sourly. "We smallfolk pay the price no matter who wins." Nyrema felt a pang of empathy for his bitterness. She herself had once been dazzled by the notion of the Targaryen lineage, but all the stories of war and conquest overshadowed the dream of a nobler Valyria that might have existed before corruption. Now she could only hope that somehow her knowledge might prevent at least a fraction of bloodshed. But with each passing day, the realm slid closer to chaos. She wondered if her letter had ever reached King's Landing, or if it lay unopened in some mail sack overshadowed by urgent messages of mobilizing armies. Rain finally began to fall in the late afternoon, forcing them to seek shelter under a rocky overhang near a shallow creek. They huddled there, soggy and chilly, though Braddon managed to coax a small fire to life. Carys and Septon Eldon sang a hymn to the Seven, their voices echoing off the rocks. Nyrema listened quietly, letting the simple melody soothe her. For a moment, she almost forgot the ring, the war, the masked threats. She closed her eyes and let the droplets patter against the stones, sinking into a rare moment of peace. She dozed, lulled by the hymn and the soft hush of rain. In her dreams, she saw flickers of Valyria, great spires of black stone, skies laden with ash, dragons coiling in labyrinthine catacombs. She saw a group of exiles boarding a ship, their faces creased with fear and determination, clutching old scrolls close to their chests. Then she saw Bravos, the Titan looming overhead, and the House of Black and White's doors opening. Within, the exiles knelt before a silent altar, their eyes hollowed by grief. "We forsake what we were," she heard them say in a chorus. "We serve death for all." Then came a swirl of masks, shifting, transforming, each face melting into another. She reached out, trying to grasp a fleeting figure. Was it Syrah? Remian? Herself? She couldn't tell. The masks parted, revealing only darkness. In the dream, she felt the ring slip from her fingers, tumbling into a void. She awoke with a start, heart pounding. The rain had eased, replaced by a pale evening light. Her companions were preparing a meager supper of foraged greens and the last of their bread. Carys noticed her waking and offered a gentle smile. "Bad dreams?" she asked, concern touching her features. Nyrema forced a shrug. "Just memories." She reached for her canteen, sipping water to steady herself. "We should move on tomorrow." Braddon nodded. "We'll follow the creek until it merges with a larger river, then decide our path. Maybe we can head north into less troubled lands." They huddled close as night fell once more, each taking a watch in turn. Nyrema found her shift passing quietly save for the distant hoot of an owl. She tried not to dwell on the ring but found her thoughts returning to it again and again. The next day brought more traveling across rolling fields and sparse forests. They avoided larger settlements, suspecting that conscription or worse would greet them. Still, they encountered scattered refugees on the roads, families with handcarts and mules, lugging their belongings away from the rumored war zones. Tents sprang up along riverbanks, clusters of displaced people sharing what they could. It reminded Nyrema eerily of old tales about the aftermath of previous conflicts. The group offered small acts of help where possible. Carys tended to a boy's infected cut. Septon Eldon blessed a newborn child under the watchful eyes of anxious parents. Nyrema wrote letters for an elderly couple who hoped to send word to relatives in the Vale. Braddon helped with heavy lifting. Each act was a raindrop in a desert, but they did what they could. One afternoon, they came across a ragged camp of refugees where a wiry man with a bandaged arm recognized Braddon. They had fought together in a previous skirmish. The man, named Naren, explained that his village was sacked by a band of outlaws. Nyrema's stomach clenched when he described their leader, hooded, with a scar across his cheek, merciless in battle. "Killed our reeve for sport," Naren muttered. "Took everything of value." Nyrema felt a chill. Carys pressed a hand to her mouth. "How long ago?" "Just 2 days past," Naren replied. "He and his band left us with nothing. They carried a strange coin purse, some silver ring they showed around, saying it was proof they were in the service of, I don't know, some foreign order. We were too frightened to protest. They forced any able-bodied men to join them or be cut down." Nyrema exchanged a frightened glance with Braddon. The man was using her ring as a calling card to terrorize people. It confirmed her worst fears. Losing the ring had only emboldened him. Septon Eldon crossed himself in horror. Braddon laid a hand on the hilt of his sword, anger flickering in his eyes. "Where were they heading?" he asked. Naren shrugged helplessly. "Southeast, maybe? Hard to say. They don't have a fixed route, they just roam, pillaging what they can." A swirl of conflicted emotions tore at Nyrema. On the one hand, she wanted to avoid any confrontation with this dangerous man. On the other, she felt a searing guilt that her ring had become a tool of intimidation. She wondered how many more villages would suffer because he carried a symbol that might tie him to some arcane legend of Valyria, twisting it into an emblem of fear. "We should do something," she murmured under her breath. Carys looked stricken. "Septon Eldon grave?" Braddon furrowed his brow. "We can't stop a band of hardened fighters alone. But we can warn others or alert a local lord if that lord is decent." "Are there any lords who remain decent?" Nyrema asked bitterly, recalling the many stories of forced conscription. She saw the shame in Eldon's face, the sorrow in Carys' eyes. Naren coughed, drawing their attention. "We heard rumors of a small keep a day's ride east whose lady tries to protect folk from bandits. They say she's an older woman who lost her sons in a previous war. If you're looking for help, she might be it." It wasn't much of a lead, but it was all they had. With a nod, Braddon thanked Naren, handed him a few scraps of dried meat, and wished him well. As they walked away, Nyrema felt a steely resolve creeping over her. She couldn't simply ignore the trail of misery the hooded man was leaving behind. If there was a place or a person willing to stand against him, it might be worth the risk to seek them out. She voiced this to her companions, who agreed, albeit with trepidation. They turned east, a direction they had previously avoided, and began traveling at a steady pace. The terrain became rougher, the roads narrower. They passed farmland scarred by raids, burned barns, trampled crops. Occasionally, they found survivors hiding in the ruins, too terrified to speak. Nyrema's heart clenched at each sign of devastation, each blackened timber. That single choice of hers, to trade the ring for the town's safety, had unleashed new horrors in the hands of that merciless outlaw. She knew it was not purely her fault, he was clearly a killer before. But she couldn't quell the guilt that gnawed at her. Still, she pressed on, ignoring the ache in her feet and the dull weight in her chest. Finally, late on the third day of pushing east, they caught sight of a small fortress perched on a low rise overlooking a river. It was modest, 2 towers and a curtain wall of aged stone, a wooden bridge crossing a narrow moat. Fields lay around it, though many seemed untended or ravaged. Smoke rose from a single chimney within the walls, hinting at habitation. As they drew closer, they spied a handful of guards on the walls wearing mismatched armor. A tense exchange at the gate followed. The guards refused them entry at first, suspicious of travelers during wartime. But Septon Eldon's presence, and perhaps the obvious weary desperation in their faces, finally convinced them to fetch their lady. They were led into a courtyard, muddy and in disrepair, but still showing signs of once proud upkeep. An older woman with silver-streaked dark hair emerged from the main keep, leaning on a carved wooden cane. She wore a plain gown, her posture stiff. Her brown eyes surveyed them with keen intelligence. "I am Lady Faceless of Stonebridge," she said, her voice firm despite the lines of age carved into her face. I've heard that you claim to seek help against a band of raiders. Speak plainly. Are you in league with them? Braddon bowed awkwardly, then explained what they knew, how a hooded man with a scar led outlaws across the land, terrorizing villages. Septon Eldon spoke of the refugees they'd encountered, showing sympathy for the region's plight. Nyrema remained quiet until the end, then spoke haltingly of the ring that had fallen into the raider's hands, how he used it to cow villagers claiming some foreign authority. Lady Thalia listened intently, tapping her cane on the cobblestones. A brazen fiend indeed. We have had trouble here, though not with a hooded man. Another group claiming to be outriders for one of the Targaryen princes tried to seize supplies. We turned them away, but at cost. We're undermanned as many of our men were taken for the war. She paused, eyes flicking over Nyrema. Why do you come here? Nyrema drew a breath. Because we can't face him alone. We hoped you might have men willing to stand against such outlaws, or at least we might coordinate with you to protect the local villages. One of the guards snorted. We're stretched thin as it is. Lady Thalia raised a hand to silence him. Her gaze lingered on Nyrema's face. You wear no house colors, child, but your bearing suggests you've seen more than a common traveler. Where do you hail from? Nyrema hesitated, then offered a truncated version of her story, an orphan from Old Town, traveling the realm. She did not mention Bravos or the Targaryen lineage. She sensed Lady Thalia's suspicion but also her curiosity. We ask for nothing but a chance to help. If you can spare a few men, or if you can direct us to someone in the region who might stand against these marauders, we'd be grateful. The lady tapped her cane again, thinking. I have no men to spare, truly. We are fewer than 24 here, including the stable hands and cooks. But we do what we can for the local folk. She studied Septon Eldon's face. You're a Septon of no small courage, it seems, traveling in times like these. He inclined his head. I do my best. We want to protect the innocent. That's all. Lady Thalia's lips curved slightly. Then she addressed them all. You may stay here this night. We have room in the old barracks. But do not expect a warm welcome from my guards, these are dangerous days. In the morning, we'll talk further. If these outlaws truly pose a threat to the region, we may need to take action. Relief washed through Nyrema. She and her companions expressed their gratitude. The lady steward, a tired-looking man named Shurin, showed them to a small barracks room with 4 narrow cots. It was cramped, but it was a roof over their heads. They stowed their packs and took a moment to rest. Outside, the sound of an evening meal being prepared drifted through the courtyard. The faint sense of stew and fresh bread teased Nyrema's senses. It had been ages since she'd eaten anything more than sparse roadside fare. Later, they were invited to dine in the great hall. A modest chamber with a long wooden table lit by a pair of smoky torches. Lady Thalia sat at the head with her cane leaning against the table. A few guards and household staff sat farther down. The meal was simple stew, bread, and watered wine. No lavish feast, but it felt like a banquet to travelers who had lived on scraps. As they ate, Lady Thalia asked pointed questions about the war's progress and the rumors of Targaryen princes. Carys explained that they had not seen actual dragons, only heard talk of them. Septon Eldon expressed a pious hope for peace, though he admitted it was unlikely. Lady Thalia frowned, lines deepening around her mouth. Dragons in the sky again. I remember seeing one in my youth, majestic and terrifying. If they start fighting each other, the realm will burn. Nyrema listened quietly, aware of the pang in her chest. House Targaryen had once claimed to be the rightful inheritors of Valyria's might. Yet here was another reminder that such might often led to ruin. She wondered if the exiles who became the Faceless men had foreseen this endless cycle of blood and fire. When the meal ended, Lady Thalia dismissed her staff and guards, keeping only Shurin by her side. She leaned forward, addressing the travelers. I suspect there is more to your story. You speak with conviction about protecting villages from outlaws, yet you are not soldiers. Nor are you merchants. What is it you truly seek? Nyrema felt Braddon shift uncomfortably. Carys exchanged a glance with Septon Eldon. They hadn't prepared a script for this moment. In the hush that followed, Nyrema took a breath and decided to be partly truthful. I'm a scholar, my lady, she said softly. I've studied Valyrian history and certain lost records. That knowledge put me in conflict with dangerous people. This hooded outlaw may be one of them. He took an heirloom from me, a ring that carried more meaning than I realized. Now he uses it to terrorize others. Lady Thalia's eyes narrowed. Valyrian history? Then you have an interest in dragons. And your ring, did it bear some mark of House Targaryen? Nyrema felt a jolt of unease. She tried to keep her expression neutral. It had a partial sigil, yes. Lady Thalia tapped her cane, expression thoughtful. If these men have your ring, they might claim authority in the name of the Targaryens. Or perhaps they use it as a symbol to frighten people with the specter of dragons. Either way, it's a cunning tactic. The small folk would be more likely to submit if they believe the raiders have powerful allies. Precisely, Nirema agreed. We wish to stop them before they spread more fear. They've left behind burned villages and terrified refugees. We thought you might know local lords who would rally to end such banditry. Lady Valyria gave a short, humorless laugh. Local lords, child, are too busy picking sides in the Targaryen quarrel. They're raising levies, forcing peasants to fight for one prince or the other. A small band of outlaws is hardly a concern when a dragon might appear overhead tomorrow. At least, that's how they see it. As for me, I do what I can. But if these outlaws are indeed a larger threat, we'll need more help. Septon Eldon spoke up. Then let us help you gather allies. If we travel the region, we might find other pockets of resistance to bandits. Villages or minor knights who won't stand for it. Perhaps we can rally them under your banner. She frowned. My banner is a moth-eaten rag, Septon. House Valyria once had status, but I lost my heirs in a previous war. I hold this keep by the king's grace, but the king is half dead or possibly worse. Still, she cast a long look around the hall, her gaze lingering on the few guards present. We can't simply stand idle while these brigands roam free. If you are truly willing to risk your lives, then so be it. They discussed logistics, drawing up a rough plan to send out riders, if Lady Valyria could spare any, to warn neighboring hamlets and gather information about the outlaws' movements. The travelers would rest a day or two, then venture forth as roving scouts, hoping to track the band and coordinate efforts. It was tenuous at best, but better than nothing. When the meeting concluded, Lady Valyria retired, leaving Shurin to show them back to the barracks. The old steward's face was drawn with worry. My lady's heart is in the right place, but I fear our strength is too small, he said. We cannot fight many well-armed outlaws. Braddon grunted in agreement. We'll try to avoid a direct clash until we know their numbers. Maybe we can muster a larger force. Nirema was silent, her mind churning with the memory of the hooded man's grin. She recalled how he had spoken High Valyrian so effortlessly. The question gnawed at her. Was he truly a faceless man, or just a cunning sellsword who had learned fragments of the language somewhere? Either way, she suspected that a typical fight might not be enough to stop him. He could change identities or slip away like a shad. Ow! She felt a wave of doubt. But she pushed it down, reminding herself that she owed it to the people he terrorized to at least try. The next day, they rested at Stonebridge, grateful for a break from the road. Carys helped treat a handful of minor injuries among the keep's guards, while Septon Eldon led a short devotion in the keep's tiny September. Braddon assisted with repairing some fences in the fields, eager to make himself useful. Nirema tried to piece together a map of the region from scraps the keep possessed, a rough patchwork of farmland, small rivers and old roads. Shurin provided what knowledge he had of local hamlets and manors. They planned potential routes for searching. In the late afternoon, as Nirema pored over the makeshift map in a corner of the great hall, Lady Valyria approached with a guarded expression. She leaned on her cane, gazing down at the drawings. You remind me of my daughter, she said softly. She once studied the old histories, before war stole her from me. Nirema looked up, startled. I'm sorry for your loss. Lady Valyria's gaze flicked to the battered pages. What do you hope to find out there? You'll chase rumors of a bandit king with a stolen ring. But even if you confront him, you might not reclaim it. It's not only about the ring, Nirema said. It's about stopping further harm. He uses it as a symbol to instill fear, and people believe he's unstoppable. That's a noble goal. Lady Valyria paused, her eyes lingering on Nirema's face. Yet I sense that your interest in that ring runs deeper. You're careful with your words, but I've lived long enough to see the truth in people's eyes. Is it tied to your blood, your name? Nirema tensed. The older woman's intuition was unnerving. In a way, she admitted quietly, but that matters less to me now than making sure no one else suffers because of it. Lady Valyria inclined her head, respect softening her features. I wish my daughter had lived to show the same compassion. She was gentle but often hesitant to act. Courage is hard-won, child. If you truly mean to protect the small folk, you'll have my blessing, and what little aid I can provide. Thank you, Nyrema said, meaning it. We'll do our best. That evening, a pair of Lady Phalia's guards returned from a patrol, reporting that they'd found the remains of a burned caravan a few miles away. Among the wreckage, they discovered no survivors, but they did see a carved symbol in the dirt, what looked like a stylized dragon's head. Fear prickled Nyrema's skin. It seemed the hooded man was leaving a calling card. Word would spread that the Targaryens' wrath roamed freely, stoking confusion in a realm already on the edge of civil war. Braddon cursed under his breath. Carys pressed trembling fingers to her lips. Nyrema felt her anger flare. She was done hiding. She told Lady Phalia they would leave at first light, heading in the direction of that caravan wreck to gather clues, then track the raiders if possible. They might not stand a chance in open battle, but if they could warn others and coordinate a response, it was worth trying. Morning came with a sharp chill in the air. Shirin provided them each with a bit of hard bread and salt beef as well as fresh water skins. Lady Phalia appeared in the courtyard to see them off, wishing them luck. If you find their trail, do not attempt to fight alone, she warned. Return here and we'll muster what force we can or seek help from neighboring manors if possible. They thanked her, the keep's gates groaned open, and they departed. The countryside was quiet except for the rustling of wind through tall grass. Nyrema led the way, guided by the guards' descriptions of the caravan's location. They traveled for hours along a winding dirt track, each step heavy with trepidation. Finally, the smell of charred wood led them to the site. It was grim. A few wagon wheels lay half-burned, splintered crates scattered in the ashes. The bodies, mercifully, had been removed perhaps by local peasants or passing travelers. But dark stains on the ground told the tale of violence. Carys knelt to examine tracks in the mud while Braddon prowled the perimeter, muttering about possible angles of attack. Septon Eldon offered a low prayer for the dead. Nyrema felt her stomach twist at the sight of the etched dragon's head in the soil. It was crude but unmistakable, scrawled with the tip of a blade or spear. She swallowed, stepping closer. He's using the symbol of House Targaryen, she murmured, probably to sow terror or to attract certain allies. Braddon nodded. He wants people to think he's backed by a prince, or maybe he's forging a new claim of his own. He paused, looking at her with worry. Could he be trying to pass himself off as a lost Targaryen heir? Using your ring to bolster that lie? The question made Nyrema's blood run cold. It seemed absurd, but in a realm teetering on the edge of war, bold claims often gained traction if repeated enough. It's possible, she said softly. He might stir up confusion or rally desperate folk who want a strong figure to follow. If he's cunning enough, who knows how many will flock to him, believing he's a Targaryen rebel. Septon Eldon rubbed his temples. What a nightmare. The realm can't handle another pretender. They found hoofprints leading away from the site, heading southeast. After a short discussion, they decided to follow the trail, hoping it would lead them to the raiders' next target. They had to tread carefully, though. If they stumbled upon the entire band, they'd be overwhelmed. Their best bet was to gather information from villages or travelers along the route. So began a grim pursuit across the hinterlands. They walked for days, pausing in small hamlets to ask if anyone had seen riders bearing a dragon banner or marking. In one place, they met only frightened stares. In another, a farmstead had been robbed a week earlier. The hooded man was always a step ahead, leaving behind rumors and destruction. At night, Nyrema dreamed of him holding the ring, swirling it before a ragged crowd, proclaiming false ties to the Targaryen line. She woke in cold sweats, feeling an invisible net tighten around her. Their search pushed them farther southeast, the land growing rockier, dotted with crags and sparse woodlands. Supplies ran low, forcing them to forage or rely on the grudging charity of scattered peasants. They often slept in the open, huddled near meager fires. Fear gnawed at them, yet they pressed on, spurred by the knowledge that each day they delayed, the raiders might strike another settlement. Late one evening, after hours of trudging through rocky hills, they stumbled upon a hidden gully that sheltered a small encampment. At first, they thought it might be a site of bandits. But as they approached warily, they glimpsed battered tents and a handful of quiet figures tending a cookfire. The smell of stew wafted on the breeze. Braddon signaled caution, drawing his sword halfway from its scabbard. Nyrema called out softly, "We mean no harm." The figures froze, then one stepped into the flickering firelight, a weathered man with a thick beard, an old blade at his side. Behind him, others crouched, uncertain. They wore rough attire, some bearing bruises or bandaged wounds. Who goes there? The bearded man demanded, voice tense. Nyrema lifted her hands in a gesture of peace. Travelers searching for a dangerous band. Have you encountered them? A wary silence followed. Then the bearded man let out a slow breath. We have. We're survivors of it. He turned slightly, revealing a ragged group behind him, perhaps 8 or 9 men and women, plus a couple of older children. The hooded butcher. He slaughtered half our village for resisting. We fled here, hiding. Septon Eldon stepped forward, his face etched with compassion. We're so sorry. We want to see him stop. The survivors regarded them with desperate hope and exhaustion. The bearded man's voice was bitter. Stopped? Who can stand against him? He's got at least 30 men, some well-armed. They're all living off plunder, following him like hounds to a bone. Says he's got Targaryen blood, he does. Flashes some ring. Claims the 7 themselves want him to seize the throne. Nyrema fought a wave of nausea. Carys placed a reassuring hand on her arm. Braddon's jaw flexed. We can't let this continue, he growled. The bearded man sneered. And how will 4 travelers do better than an entire village? If you're wise, you'll hide. The realm's a tinderbox. Even if you kill him, more wars will spawn. Save yourselves. Nyrema looked around at the frightened faces. The children with hollow eyes, the women cradling meager bundles of belongings. She felt a surge of determination that drowned out her fear. We won't hide, she said softly. There must be a way. A hollow laugh answered her. Well, if you find one, let us know. But don't lead him here, or we're all dead. Night deepened, and the survivors eventually allowed the 4 companions to share their meager fire. They exchanged stories, none of them pleasant. The bearded man, Jorth was his name, explained that the hooded leader had begun calling himself Enix Targaryen, claiming some grand Valyrian heritage. He promised wealth and power to any who bent the knee. Those who defied him were slaughtered. Word was spreading, and desperate or opportunistic folk were joining him in droves, swelling his ranks. He might have been just another brigand, but he wielded an aura of mystery, pointing to the ring as proof of his lineage, sprinkling a few Valyrian phrases to dazzle the ignorant. Half the realm might be too busy with the real Targaryen feud to intervene anytime soon. Nyrema felt her heart pound at the brazen theft of her identity, turning her ring, her heritage, into a twisted lie. She stared into the fire until her eyes burned. Carys whispered words of comfort, but Nyrema scarcely heard them. She was forging a resolve, the shape of which terrified her. If this false Enix continued unchecked, he could unleash a wave of atrocities across the countryside. The real Targaryens, embroiled in their own succession crisis, might not notice until it was too late. Meanwhile, the House of Black and White might watch from the shadows or perhaps even profit if someone paid them to slay the pretender. But who would pay? The small folk had no coin. She recalled Syrah's warning that the secrets of the exiled Valyrians were not meant to disrupt the realm. If the many-faced god willed her death to preserve their anonymity, they would send a blade. But now, ironically, that secret was being perverted by a pretender to justify murder and subjugation. It was everything those exiles had once fled from, reborn in a twisted form. Jorth told them the raiders were rumored to be heading east toward a larger town where a minor lord had built a palisade. If he can persuade that lord to join him or kill him outright, he'll grow stronger still, Jorth said. We can't do anything. We've lost everything already. Nyrema glanced at Braddon, Carys, and Septon Eldon. She saw the determination mirrored in their faces. They had no illusions about their chances, but none of them seemed ready to walk away. The conversation died down as fatigue and despair settled. One by one, the survivors drifted into restless sleep. Nyrema lay awake, the flickering flames etching shadows on her face, her mind spinning like a top. Just before dawn, she rose quietly, stepping away from the camp to gather her thoughts. The sky was still dark, dotted with faint stars. A breeze stirred, carrying the scent of damp earth. She knelt by a narrow trickle of a stream, the cool water gliding over stones. This was the life she had chosen, wandering, seeking knowledge, straying from the House of Black and White to preserve her freedom and sense of mercy. Now she was embroiled in a crisis that felt far beyond her ability to handle. Yet the alternative, turning a blind eye, was no option at all. She reached for the place on her chest where the ring had once rested, feeling only the empty chain's outline against her bodice. Tears threatened, but she blinked them back. If Remian or any of those old exiles could see her now, what would they counsel? Perhaps they'd remind her that a single flame can light another, that small acts can accumulate. Or perhaps they'd say nothing, for they had learned that death had many faces and no easy answers. But she wasn't them, she was Nyrema, and she had chosen life. Standing, she dried her hands on her cloak, gazing east where the false dawn brightened the horizon. She thought of Syrah, the woman who had shown her both danger and mercy in Bravos. Would Syrah be proud or appalled by her next move? It hardly mattered. The time for half-measures was over. She returned to camp, stepping carefully around sleeping forms, and woke Braddon, Carys, and Septon Eldon. When they were a short distance from the camp, Nyrema spoke in a low whisper. "We can't let him gather more power. We have to reach that town before he does, warn them, help them fortify. If we can rally any local knights or men-at-arms, maybe we can stand a chance of turning him back." Braddon nodded. "We may die trying, but it's the only way." Carys looked frightened, yet she squared her shoulders. "I'm with you." Septon Eldon clasped his hands together, looking to the sky. "The seven guide us," he murmured, then gave a firm nod. They packed up silently, leaving the survivors to their fitful slumber. Perhaps the group would move on at first light, seeking safer refuge. All Nyrema knew was that she and her companions had a mission now, to intercept or outmaneuver Enox Targaryen and his band of killers. A swirl of terror and fierce resolve coursed through her. She had never wanted war. She had never wanted to stand in open defiance of a man who might wield the skills of a faceless man. But she had chosen to be more than a bystander. As they headed east through the pale, early light, the distant call of crows echoed across the hills. The realm was drifting into chaos, but perhaps within that chaos, their small spark of resistance could make a difference. Nyrema held to that fragile hope, each footstep a prayer that the next dawn would find fewer innocents in peril. Far away, the memory of her ring and the lost lineage it symbolized flickered in her mind, fueling a quiet inner fire that refused to die. She would stand against the darkness, ring or no ring, face or no face. And if any Targaryen blood truly flowed in her veins, let it serve not conquest or cruelty, but the desperate cry of those who needed it most.